Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
Well, see again, the people who classify themselves as white are not happy with their appearance. Now, they've taught us to be unhappy about our appearance. You see, but they're very unhappy about their appearance. I think there's an article in the handout about a white woman who was in Hawaii. And she said that being around the Hawaiian people and the Asian people, and she said she was tall and white and pale, she said she felt like a freak. And so then she started getting involved in genetic science.
It's Todd Zwillich. Welcome back to The Takeaway. And let's go now to a scientific first in the United States, one that could play a major role in reducing genetically based disease. Scientists in Oregon have edited genes inside living human embryos for the first time. They did it using a breakthrough gene editing technology called CRISPR that was developed in 2015. This was an experimental lab. No babies were born, but the promise of being able to edit genetic diseases right out of an embryo's DNA could be a major step for healthcare. But if disease genes can be edited, other genes can be edited too. And the breakthrough also raises the possibility of designer babies, allowing parents to pick the kinds of desirable genetic traits they would like for their children. Art Kaplan is with me now to talk about the medical promise of this new technology and the ethical concerns around it. He's director of the Division of Medical Ethics at the New York University School of Medicine. Dr. Kaplan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Well, gene editing in vitro has always been, Dr. Kaplan, this kind of sci-fi dystopia idea, but it's been increasingly obvious that it was close to reality. How big of a deal scientifically is this?
It's a big deal. It's obviously still a long way from having a super baby designed for a wealthy couple. You know, we don't know if this technique is going to work. We don't know if it's safe. But going into human embryos and engineering something, that's a major step. That is a major step.
Now, this was the first time in the U.S., but where else has this been going on around the world, and how efficient is it?
Well, China has had a couple of scientific teams report embryo editing, but they used embryos that were intentionally disabled. That is, you couldn't put them inside a woman, they wouldn't grow, they shut off other genes. This report, and remember, we still haven't seen the paper, it's just a leaked report that somebody has done this, involves embryos that, in theory, if you put them inside a woman's body, would develop into a fetus and ultimately perhaps a person.
So there's a very clear scientific upside here. There's also an ethical upside and an ethical downside. Let's start on the upside and the kinds of diseases that might be editable here with this new technology.
So we have a variety of ailments that really occur in humans because of a single error in DNA alphabet. That is, it's called a point mutation. It just means there's one typo that's causing trouble. Think sickle cell disease, hemophilia, cystic fibrosis, even the disease that Charlie Gard, the little boy who was the subject of so much discussion and debate, about extending his care and looking for experimental treatments in London. He has a kind of genetic disease that is relatively simple in terms of genetic cause. If you could find a way to edit in the right letter, repair the typo, you could, in theory, repair these diseases, prevent them at the embryo stage, kind of subjecting the embryo to genetic surgery. That could do a lot of good because not only would you get rid of the disease in the individual, you might get rid of it in their offspring, thereby ultimately perhaps getting rid of genetic diseases of some kinds in human beings forever.
Now, of course, some diseases have one or two typos. Most don't. Most have hundreds or thousands or more. So given this accomplishment, how far are you away from much more complex diseases that have genetic components or really complex genetic origins?
Yeah, good question, and pretty far. Basically the technique is just in its infancy. It sometimes puts letters in where there aren't typos. Those are sort of target mistakes. We don't know what the error rate is yet, much less what that might do in terms of safety to a child born with that kind of engineering. So I'm going to say for the foreseeable future, meaning 5, 7, 8 years, at most, you're going to see people try to go after small typos, single mutation type diseases. Now that would keep them pretty busy, but we're not going to get to the complicated ones for a while because that involves more changes across the entire DNA alphabet that each one of us has, introducing the danger of a higher risk rate.
Then there are, of course, the ethical downsides or the gray areas, Art Kaplan, and you know where I'm going with this. How many desirable baby traits, like gorgeous little eyes or the chin that you want, are the kinds of point source mutations that you're talking about, and how long will it take to be able to design a baby with the features that you want?
So I think people are really worried, and legitimately so. Remember, we have a history when it comes to genetics. Nazi eugenics, American eugenics, excluding people based on their ethnicity, which was a genetic immigration restriction, laws against interracial marriage in many states here, again, a eugenic type consideration. Eugenics has occurred. That said, most of the qualities that people I think would want, smarter, stronger, faster, probably involve a number of genes. So I'm not exactly worried that we're going to see eugenics in the next decade, even if we pursue this technique to treat diseases. The time is now to decide if we want to criminalize, prohibit, set limits on where you can go with respect to genetic engineering for improvement or enhancement, because we do have time. We're not going to be there for a while.
Is that a debate and a set of restrictions that you think need to take place now?
I do. I think the time is to have that debate right now because it's going to be very controversial. Remember, there are many people who would say, if I could improve my child's memory, if I could enhance my vision in a child, if I could make my child have a better immune system and resist diseases, then let's do that. I want to do that. It's not clear that everyone will find improvement and enhancement immoral or wrong. So we're going to have to really debate this and get settled on it. Plus, we have to put the penalties in place. Are you going to jail if you try to do this? Would any journal publish a paper in a prohibited area? So a lot of work to do. Time to discuss that is now, but I'm going to say I wouldn't hold up the disease research on the basis of saying we've got to settle the eugenics issue first. We have time with the eugenics issue. We can decide to pursue disease prevention, and I think both can go on at the same time.
The scientific possibility and the ethical dilemma of the new technology of in vitro gene editing. Art Kaplan of the New York University School of Medicine. Thanks, Dr. Kaplan.
Thank you.
Not a line has been written, no characters have been cast, and there's not even a plot summary. But HBO is in the middle of a big controversy over a new TV series called Confederate. It's about a world where the South didn't lose the Civil War. Critics say it's offensive. NPR TV critic Eric Deggans talked to the African-American husband and wife producing team who are fighting for the idea.
Nichelle Trimble-Spellman says it's been like a crash course in crazy. Last week, HBO announced plans to develop Confederate, a drama set in an alternate reality where slavery is part of contemporary American society. Critics denounced the idea as insensitive and exploitive. One reason, the producers touted by HBO as creators and showrunners were David Benioff and D.B. Weiss. Weiss and Benioff are executive producers of HBO's most popular drama series, Game of Thrones. They're also white, and Game of Thrones has been criticized for years over its lack of ethnic diversity and depictions of sexualized violence. But Nichelle Trimble-Spellman and her husband, Malcolm Spellman, two African-American writers, are also executive producers on the project. Nichelle said she felt marginalized by people ready to assume the worst.
We knew that there would be a reaction to the material, but the press release was vague, so everybody ran with the worst parts of their imagination to figure out what it was the four of us were doing. So I was kind of surprised by how much the misinformation traveled and how far it got.
The Spellmans, who have worked on shows like Empire and The Good Wife, insist they're equal partners in developing the show with Weiss and Benioff. And although they haven't written an outline yet, Malcolm Spellman is clear on what the show is not.
The project is not antebellum imagery. It's not whips. It's not plantations. It's not a celebration or pornography for slavery. And most importantly, it's not an entire nation of slaves.
Malcolm Spellman says the situation in their American South will be comparable to apartheid-era South Africa. What they hope to show is how slavery is directly connected to racial issues we struggle with now, from police brutality and mass incarceration in communities of color to suppression of voting rights. HBO has pushed back against the backlash, arranging interviews with the Spellmans to show there are black producers involved. But the initial news release for the show emphasized Weiss and Benioff's role, apparently to let Game of Thrones fans know what the pair would do when that series ends next year. So if HBO can't get the announcement right, can they be trusted to get the show right? I asked HBO programming president Casey Bloys. His response? Give us a chance.
All we can ask is give these artists the chance to have their work evaluated, and all of us, the executive producers in HBO, will rise or fall on the quality of the work.
The Spellmans say they will consult historians and experts to ground their fiction in known facts. I asked, is it possible that despite their best efforts, they might create a show that white supremacists would see as validation for their beliefs? In the way some bigots in the 1970s saw Archie Bunker as a hero instead of a buffoon on All in the Family.
We are black. We are not going to create that reality. We're not doing that show. We wouldn't do that show.
As a critic, I never want to judge a show before I see it, but I do hope this controversy serves as a wake-up call for TV executives who still sometimes overlook how delicate these issues can be. I'm Eric Deggans.
I don't want us to lose sight that things are getting better. Each successive generation seems to be making progress in changing attitudes when it comes to race. Doesn't mean we're in a post-racial society. It doesn't mean that racism is eliminated. But, you know, when I talk to Malia and Sasha, and I listen to their friends and I see them interact, they're better than we are. They're better than we were on these issues. And that's true in every community that I've visited all across the country.
A sign vandalized with a racial slur in Ocala could spell out a lot more than criminal mischief charges for the culprits.
TV20's Haley Wade tells us why investigators say it could be an uphill battle to charge the vandalism as a hate crime.
That's very hard to prove, and it's something that we have to do throughout our investigation.
When Marion County Sheriff's deputies were called out to Rotary Sportsplex, they were met with a vandalism case that some residents are calling a hate crime. On one side, a threatening racial slur was spelled out in the middle of the board. The opposite side showcased curse words.
Usually there's a big plastic panel that covers the sign so no one can move the letters around. Well, that plastic panel was damaged in recent storms, which is exactly how people got
access to it last night. But the slur alone isn't enough to pin down the vandalism as a hate crime.
Right now, it's a criminal mischief as we have it today. That can change.
Deputies say state statutes make it difficult to prove, but not impossible.
If we can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, hate crime charges may be brought forth in this case.
There aren't any cameras near the sign, but investigators hope there were witnesses who can help.
I know that we may have had people come forward seeing it. It's on a very public road.
The sign should have a new cover soon that only park staff members can open.
We're working to make sure that a situation like this never transpires again.
Deputies are in the very early stages of the investigation. The more information they get, the better they can pin down the intent behind the crime.
We will definitely follow up on that, and we're still going through this entire investigation.
Deputies are still working to identify suspect.
I can feel it deep inside, this black nigger's pride. I have no fear when I say, and I say it every day, every nigger is a star. Every nigger is a star. Who will deny that you and I and every nigger is a star?
Tonight, a North Florida community reacting to this local councilman resigning amid accusations of making racial remarks. Thanks for joining us at 11. I'm Ben Kaplan.
And I'm Abby Walton. People in Havana claiming Bobby Miller used the N-word twice during Tuesday's council meeting. Our Tiffany Lewis was in Havana earlier today. And Tiffany, what are people saying about this?
Ben, Abby, many agree with Miller's decision to resign, but others tell me their concerns go far beyond this one incident.
People in the audience that was there, both black and white, was disturbed by what he said.
Jerome Harris attending a Havana City Council meeting Tuesday, allegedly facing racist remarks from board member Bobby Miller.
He has clearly stated calling me the N-word.
Harris, not shocked by the remarks, saying Miller had been shaping policy to adversely affect African Americans in the community for years.
Now it is more integrated on the north side of town, but it's still mostly blacks on the south side of town. And we still face the same problems about getting services from the council.
Other members of the community agreeing, saying Miller was the head decision maker, working directly against Southside neighborhoods.
But each time you get a grant for different things around here, they start up here, but by the time they get to these different areas, the money done gave out. You see what I'm saying? So that's what the excuses they give us.
Town manager Howard McKinnon denying the accusations.
We at Town Hall here, serve the whole community, and that's our goal. And, we've always strived to serve the whole community.
Harris saying he's hopeful that Miller was the last member with a prejudiced mindset.
He was considered the lion of Havana. He's the last lion of Havana. I mean, he was the stronghold that they had, and he's gone. So, I feel like David. I conquered Goliath.
Hoping that with his resignation comes better opportunities for all parts of the city. Steps to fill Miller's seat will be discussed at next month's meeting. We did reach out to Bobby Miller today for comment, but so far we've not heard anything back. Abby, Ben, back to you.
All right, Tiffany, thank you. A longtime councilman in Havana is stepping down after allegations of racial remarks. Bobby Miller resigning this morning, according to the Havana town manager. Miller's accused of using the N-word twice as two African-American residents spoke before the council on Tuesday. We reached out to Miller for a comment. We have not yet heard back. Miller has served on the council for more than 40 years. Steps to fill his seat will be discussed at next month's meeting.
Every nigger is a star. Every nigger is a star. Who will deny that you and I and every nigger is a star?
So Mapleton woman continues to deal with the consequences of her actions after video of her harassing 3 Somali women in Fargo went viral.
Amber Hensley has issued an apology, and the 3 women behind the camera say that they hope she changes. They also want bystanders to speak up when hate crimes happen.
KBRR's Nick Broadway was the first television reporter to speak with them and has more in our lead story.
What are you going to do?
We're going to kill all of you. We're going to kill every one of you f***ing Muslims.
Within hours, a recording of Amber Hensley shouting at 3 Somali women reaches thousands of people online. The women say harassment like this is common.
She called me from the window and she told me, like, come and fix the parking. She started talking about my sister's eyes because my sister have, like, crossed eyes. Why are you saying this stuff to my sister? I'm about to have surgery for my eyes. And, like, is there any problem? She was like, can't you see her eyes? And you are, bad words on Muslims and we are going to kill you. And
what inspired you to go ahead and start recording her?
Because actually this kind of thing, things, especially discrimination, happens every single day. She started threatening me that she's going to kill us. That's why, like, I had to take out my phone and started recording everything happened there. And I'm going to show it to the police. Okay?
We told her, we're going to record the video and show it to the police, and she was like, police is not going to do nothing to you guys. Like, they're not going to do nothing.
I just want to tell her, like, to change the way she thinks about people because we're all human beings.
Do you think Fargo is a welcoming community?
Not really.
It's increasing day by day, especially after Donald Trump won.
We consider us as Americans because we live here and we are American.
We need leaders to condemn this issue, and I still believe Fargo is the place I came 3 years ago, the place I felt welcome.
Hensley claims one of the 3 women called her fat and said F Jesus.
If there's anything that you could say to this woman, what would you tell her?
God bless you. I wish you change.
Nick Broadway, KVRR Local News.
Fargo police are investigating. No charges have been filed.
I reached out to Amber last night on Facebook before her account was inactivated, and she sent me this response. She wrote, quote, I would first like to apologize for the horrible things that I said to the 2 ladies of Walmart. It was not a Christian-like thing to do at all and wish I could take it back, but I lost my cool and I can't. I'm terribly sorry. I just wish that the whole video could be shown and the things that were stated before she starts taping. She had parked way too close to my car and I couldn't get in. When I asked her to move, she refused. I asked her again and she swore at me, calling me a fat bleep. To that, I informed her that I was a Christian and asked her if she knew who Jesus was. She said, bleep Jesus, and I lost it. But there are absolutely no excuses. I'm in tears with regret and will take any form of punishment deemed fit, end quote. She also told me that she would like to sit down with the women who recorded the video and give them a face-to-face apology.
Hensley's employer has also issued its own statement after the company was overwhelmed by calls and emails. They told us Horb&Wentz does not agree with or support the statements expressed by Amber Hensley in the recent posted video. She does not reflect the views of Horb&Wentz. Miss Hensley is no longer employed with Horb&Wentz effective immediately. Amber was employed as a secretary and was not a CPA. A community rally against hate crime and bias speech will be held next Wednesday. It'll start at 5:30 at the mall between the Fargo Civic Center and 4th Street North.
Now I really understand what they mean when they say white power. White power, yeah. Come on. White power. It's white
power. Good evening, I'm Justin Wilfon.
And I'm Lori Wilson. New tonight at 11, a Buckhead waitress says a customer handed her a menu with a swastika drawn on it. She says it was just the start of a hate-filled night that ended with her in tears. Channel 2's Ricky Klaus is live outside the restaurant where this all happened. And Ricky, the customer, was part of a group there for a Holocaust deniers speaking event.
That's right, and when Shelley Sidney saw this swastika drawn on a menu, she could not believe it. She says this was the most hateful thing anyone has ever done to her.
It means hate.
Shelley Sidney was waiting on a private party at Antica Posta in Buckhead Thursday night.
I get to the last person in the party, and they give me a menu that has a swastika drawn on it.
She was stunned and immediately showed her boss. Sidney says owner Marco Betti cited freedom of speech. She wanted him to kick the guest out instead.
I was hurt and frustrated.
Back downstairs, Sidney says she heard a guest use the N-word.
I was really in tears when I was just overhearing the conversations, the private conversations of just how horrible black people are, immigrants are, gay people are.
She says she told Betty she was done serving the guests. We spoke with the restaurant's attorney, Manny Aurora, over the phone.
As soon as she made any reference to anything inappropriate being overheard, Marco immediately asked her if she didn't want to wait on those folks and reassign somebody else.
The staff saw books displayed in the room and researched the author. It was the known Holocaust denier David Irving hosting a speaking event. The lawyer says the owner was unaware who he was.
You don't check into people's backgrounds or their political beliefs before you agree to a reservation.
Sydney wants her boss to be more sensitive to the feelings of his diverse staff.
He never told them that they had to leave. And I think that it's unacceptable for this to be able to go on. It's 2017.
The attorney says the group did not cause any disturbances. Shelley, she says her boss has asked her not to come in the past couple of days. The attorney says she still has a job if she so chooses. We're reporting live in Buckhead. Ricky Klaus, Channel 2 Action News, Night Beat.
So how's the college responding to this incident?
We're having a race forum.
And what's that?
A forum on race, so we can discuss the incident and the surrounding issues of race.
So the usual lip service.
No comment.
Thank you, Taryn. City leaders hope to have a contractor complete the demolition work within at least 48 hours. Now, as Taryn said, a Natchez Adams County School Board meeting turns ugly after a board member calls people in the crowd racist. As WJTV's Margaret Ann Carter reports, it all started after the community voted down a school bond for $35 million.
Yeah, you're not racist, just taking racist actions. I raised my voice at anybody.
Thursday's Natchez Adams County School Board meeting looked more like a scene from a movie than a discussion on how to improve schools in the area. The school board is asking to borrow $9 million from the community to build new facilities, which would raise taxes for people across the county.
Nobody wants to pay more taxes, especially for a failing school. If you can get, money's not going to help fix that. A new building's not going to fix that.
Kevin Wilson and his wife Dana started a petition to fight the board's decision, gaining nearly 3,400 signatures. When they presented it, board member C.O.W.S responded by saying the people who signed the petition were against black children getting an education.
It kind of spiraled out of control. We were accused of being racist. Non-Christians didn't want black children to go to school.
They became unruly and got out of order. Some of them even came up to physically harm me, made threatening statements to me.
Through the yelling, you can hear someone say they're going to drag West outside.
And evidently there are some people who still think they're living in the 1800s, and then they wanted an apology for the actions of them. They acted like they were thugs and hoodlums.
The Wilsons say they were hurt by the accusations.
It's almost like a nightmare. We went there open-minded. The public notice in the newspaper said that if you wanted to do a petition that you could do that. That is our right to have a petition.
Dana Wilson says she's received death threats and people have threatened to boycott their business. But one thing remains. Neither side is giving up. West says he stands by his statements, and the Wilsons say they will continue to fight this.
I will never stop trying to make sure that the children in the city of Natchez and Adams County and the people of our state have equal justice under the law.
We're not going to be bullied, or we're not going to allow things that you see on Facebook to stop us from following what we know is right in our heart.
Reporting in Natchez, Margaret Ann Carter, WJTV 12.
Right now, the issue has been tabled until the board's attorney can verify all of the signatures on the petition. Wilson says he'll continue to get more signatures.
Seattle's a great place to visit because it has, I guess you could say, a little bit of everything, but I like to think of it as a lot of everything.
High school sports are so frustrating. We want our kids to have fun, to learn lessons, hopefully get a scholarship, or even play professionally. But are we really helping these students, or are we exploiting them? Consider this stunning fact. On the 2014 Garfield High School basketball team that won the state championship, every one of the starting players was listed as homeless. What's going on here? Here to tell you how society's best intentions can get turned upside down is Seattle Times reporter Claudia Rowe. Hi, Claudia. Welcome back.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
So you write about this federal law that is meant to help homeless kids play sports. How is this good intention being turned upside down in Seattle?
The gist of the law, which is called the McKinney-Vento law, is that it allows kids whose families might move around from shelter to shelter or friend to friend, couch to couch. They don't have to keep switching schools as their families move. That was the concept of the law, to give kids some educational stability. Essentially, it blows up the usual rules that bind kids to their neighborhood school.
Because to play on a team, you've got to live in the district, right?
Purportedly. However, for a number of children, a number of students, I should say, and they're mostly young men here in the case we're talking about, the law has been turned upside down in the sense that they don't have to abide by the usual transfer rules that bind athletes. So usually, if an athlete is switching schools and switching teams, they have to sit out a season, but not if a student has McKinney-Vento status. It's called a hardship exception. And the idea is to give kids in a bad spot a break. It also applies to their grades. So normally an athlete has to maintain a 2.0 when they play in Seattle School District, but not McKinney-Vento kids. They can play with lower grades. So, again, opportunity gives kids an incentive to, in fact, come to school, right? But then what seems to be happening is that there's not enough support on the back end so that these students end up, when the season is over or high school is over, with grades too low to really do anything else. And we know how poor the likelihood is of, in fact, making it to a Division I university or a pro team.
Right. So will you paint us a picture here? What is the typical profile? How would a school put a player on a sports team, a player who's officially homeless but maybe not really homeless?
The McKinney-Vento law covers a broad range of living situations. So many of these students are not what some of us might think of when we think of homeless. They're not living necessarily in a tent by the side of I-5. They are shacking up with friends, with relatives. They're moving around a lot.
But that is a real kind of homelessness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just not what the average reader is going to picture when they're thinking homeless youth. They're going to think about a kid who's sort of wandering around the streets. McKinney-Vento applies to any young person who does not have an adequate, stable nighttime residence.
Okay.
And so, student shows up at school, and what's becoming clear through the reporting in this story is that it is possible for athletic directors to make a notation in the school system that designates a student McKinney-Vento for purposes of athletic eligibility. And that doesn't necessarily filter down to the district office and headquarters where purportedly students are getting vetted with, much closer scrutiny.
So one way this could be exploited is that this federal homeless designation allows a student athlete to have terrible grades and still play.
Correct.
And you also write about cases in which it sounds like this student wasn't homeless until they left their families to come to Seattle and play sports.
That is correct.
How does that work?
Well, in the few cases that I highlight in the story, one young man came from Beaumont, Texas. Both of them were designated McKinney-Vento, homeless. They had families in Texas. They came up here, they say, at the behest of staff and parents affiliated with the athletic department at Garfield. And they were designated McKinney-Vento, homeless. They are not the only ones. There is also a student from Louisiana, from Baton Rouge, same thing. I know of another student came from Michigan. He was on that basketball team. So they have families in other places, but they're designated homeless here because they're not, in fact, living with their families. And they are bouncing around from home to home, couch to couch. In that sense, they are homeless.
And you can see how the intention is a noble one. For one thing, this law lets you play with poor grades, but it would probably be hard to study if you genuinely don't have a stable place to live.
That's what I think is the most interesting and sort of troubling aspect of the story. I think it's fine to give kids an opportunity, and maybe strict readers of sports rules would argue with me. But as an education reporter and as somebody who really studies that's, give kids an opportunity. Great. I have no problem with it. But support them on the back end with more than study halls required during football season. Kids in this kind of spot who have this kind of trauma going on, they need a lot more than a study hall.
Okay, so maybe there's a solution, you're saying not necessarily repeal this law that was meant to help homeless kids who want to play sports.
Correct.
But maybe if they get this federal designation, then maybe along with the law could come some kind of required extra help even beyond their playing careers?
Sure. To be fair to the district and to adults, Washington State gets about $1 million through the McKinney-Vento law from the feds. $1 million for 295 school districts. It's not going to go very far. Okay, so the homelessness staff is under-resourced. That's one thing. Secondly, it may be possible to give a 7, an 8, a 10-year-old real deal attention. But a kid who is 17 or 18, 19, in the case of some of these players, you're thinking a 19-year-old is no longer in high school, but they are. Somebody who's 17, 18, or 19 might be somewhat difficult to case manage in the same way as a little child.
I'm talking with Seattle Times reporter Claudia Rowe. What do the Seattle schools and the school district say when you confront them with these abuses?
The district's executive director of athletics acknowledged, he conceded, yes, there are holes in this law that could be exploited. The district's deputy superintendent said that he is concerned, that they are concerned about the information that is starting to come to light, both through their own looking, through what I'm presenting, and from what they're hearing. They are concerned about kids being used, they say.
You point out in your piece that most student athletes designated as homeless are black. Why is that important?
What's really interesting here is that the local chapter of the NAACP jumped all over this initially when I first wrote the story in April about the 2 young men from Texas. And because Garfield's athletic staff or their football coaching staff is African American, as is the principal, the NAACP said this is racial targeting. And they sent a letter to the school district saying the same thing. What's interesting to me is that there is a curious lack of attention to the students in the NAACP's letter. There is no real focus on the students at the center of all this who are also black and being underserved. That is what's so interesting. It's African-American coaches and predominantly African-American students. And you get into this gray area of, are you providing an opportunity or are you exploiting kids, or maybe some of both?
Maybe someone's listening to us, Claudia, and saying, these rules ought to be enforced. But is that possible? Is the district enforcing all its rules about who can play and how schools can recruit, or do you think the Seattle School District looks the other way?
I think that, again, there is a huge hole in the system. You have the Washington Interscholastic Activities Association, known as the WIAA. They are supposed to oversee athletics in the state. So they have their purview. The district is supposed to be watching out for McKinney-Vento kids. But
again, these are the kids designated federally as being homeless.
Correct.
For purposes
so the
of playing
district has
sports.
its McKinney-Vento staff. The WIAA has its eligibility hearings. But they say in my story, look, really, it's member schools who are supposed to police themselves. So, all right, if you're going to say member schools are supposed to police themselves, and then we're going to celebrate these championship teams, and we are going to sort of go, hey, we're giving homeless kids an opportunity. Great. And we can sort of shrug our shoulders and walk away. Nobody really seems to be looking all that deeply at, right, and what happens when your few months of athletic opportunity go? What happens when the season is over? And nobody really seems to be looking all that closely.
Finally, then, Claudia, there's so much in this piece, so well done at Seattle Times. Is there one solution you can leave us with that we should want to happen?
I don't know if there's one solution, but a part of the solution,
yes,
surely is better guidance, better counseling, more counselors, more training for counselors. The guidance counselors at high schools are massively overburdened, and I don't think that their training is terribly deep on kids from traumatized backgrounds. They are primarily academic transcript counselors, and they are supposed to be guiding students toward completing high school and maybe going on to college. But these students are just sort of falling under the radar. Maybe a counselor sort of shrugs his shoulders and says, hey, as happened in this case, hey, I think this kid is mainly here for football. That is not supposed to be happening. No students are supposed to be in Washington high schools for any sport. And that's very, very clear in the WIAA rules.
Better counseling for our students. That answer highlights the fact that, as you and I were saying before the microphones opened, this is not really a sports story. This is about education and our priorities.
Right. It's an education story and possibly an exploited youth story.
Claudia Rowe, reporter for Seattle Times. Always good to talk with you. Thanks for writing it. Thanks for telling us about it.
Thanks for having me in. Great to be here.
All right, let's do a little summation for number 10, okay? Let's sum it up. Now, what do we want, people? We want some land? Huh? You want some land? Type it up. You want land? You want bread? All right, that's it. Type it up. Land, bread, housing.
The real estate market here in the nation's capital appears as strong as ever. And high demand for housing means neighborhoods are changing. People with money are moving into low-income areas, and predominantly African-American areas have become whiter. It's the kind of change we're exploring this summer as part of the NPR Cities Project.
I was a part of the community.
You need to move out.
Fix up these properties.
Taxes are going to go up.
I may not afford the rent.
Howard University is a historically black institution right in the center of Washington, D.C., and it is right in the middle of all this change. Braxton Booker of member station WAMU is a Howard graduate, and he has these reflections.
Man, I really enjoyed my time at Howard University. I met my wife there, and back in 2000, I saw Jay-Z perform at Homecoming. But you know what else happened? One night, me and 10 of my friends were walking near our dorm when 2 dudes popped out of the shadows with guns and robbed all of us. Another time, at an off-campus party, someone from the neighborhood pulled a knife and stabbed a student. The neighborhood then felt much rougher than it does today. Instead of liquor stores and rundown properties, now you'll find bike shares and coffee shops like this one, where I meet Jocelyn Letterman. She's white, a realtor, and in her early 30s.
I had a lot of cab drivers asking me if I was single and that I shouldn't live over here. I was like, oh, thank you for your opinion. I don't care.
Letterman bought her condo by Howard in 2010.
I loved it. Didn't really know anything about the neighborhood, but that's kind of where I could afford to buy.
And she's come to love the university atmosphere.
I know it's fall when I hear the drum line.
That's Howard's Showtime marching band here on campus last fall. But unlike the band, the neighborhood and university have not always been in lockstep.
Okay.
Just ask Maybelle Bennett.
How you doing?
She's been Howard's point person for community outreach for 26 years.
The relationships with the community had been relatively schizophrenic.
Back when the area was predominantly black and working class, residents viewed Howard as insular. And the school heard complaints in the 80s and 90s about upkeep of its off-campus properties.
Howard needs to clean up its own backyard.
But when the university fixed things up, another point of tension surfaced. Howard was accused of gentrifying the neighborhood.
And it was damn if we do and damn if we don't, because of the rise in value and because of the rise in tax bills.
Here on Hobart Place, property values are going up. Row houses pop with fresh paint, some colors so vivid they belong in a bag of Skittles. And the change hurts some longtime residents, says Darren Jones, head of the Pleasant Plains Civic Association.
Some of my elderly neighbors are talking about not being able to pay their taxes anymore.
New condos start in the $700,000 range, 10 times what Jones paid for his home in 1993. Jones grew up here, and he's worried his adult son won't be able to stay, even in his family's old house around the corner.
Taxes are going to go up because they're going to say your house is worth what the house is worth next door.
Jones is thrilled newcomers see the beauty in his neighborhood, but he wishes prices weren't forcing neighbors out. Back on Howard's campus, Community Outreach Director Maybelle Bennett says the university is trying to help the neighborhood and itself. Howard has financial troubles, including $750 million in overdue repairs to its campus. So one solution, capitalize on the hot real estate market. The university and a developer are working on a brand new condo building with more than 300 units. Bennett knows this likely means more white people moving to this part of Washington.
It is going to continue to bring in people who do not necessarily look like us, and we are going to continue to have to find respectful ways of working with them so that we can stay alive.
The university and the community have always talked about ways to be more neighborly, but those talks are changing.
These are people who have not been there a long time and who are not the same culture, who may be frightened when they see groups of African-American men walking up and down the streets together.
When I was here at Howard, walking in a large group was a way to stay safe, though it didn't help me back in the day. Now Bennett worries some newer residents may see that same group as a threat. At Howard University in Washington, I'm Braxton Booker for the NPR Cities Project.
I've been struggling for so very long, waiting on you to come. Done everything I was told to do, neglected my common sense, waiting on you. Been burned, been wet, and I've been hung. There ain't nothing under the sun my oppressor ain't done. Been sprayed by a hose, been bit by bugs, thrown in a paddy wagon and tied like horns. I'm at the end of my race. It seems I can't win. So cracker Jesus, where the hell you been?
When Mark Hearn first became pastor of Atlanta's First Baptist Church Duluth, or FBC Duluth, in 2010, he noticed a discrepancy. His congregation was 97% Caucasian, while the surrounding community was increasingly diverse and international. On his block alone, his neighbors hailed from Malaysia, Vietnam, India, South Korea, Zimbabwe, and Puerto Rico. Hearn looked around and told himself, "This is not what my church looks like at all. If we're going to be effective in this community, we're going to need to learn how to cross cultural barriers and language barriers in order to truly carry the gospel into this community." Hearn intentionally pursued diversity at his Georgia church. Now, both the church and the community are reaping the rewards. FBC Duluth proactively planted churches in countries heavily represented in their community, allowing them to understand their neighbors' cultures. They celebrated foreign holidays. They elected deacons and hired paid staff members from the international community. They held special services in other languages. And as a result, FBC Duluth has grown, with members from 37 different nations. Hearn says it's proof that diversity doesn't just happen. It's got to be intentional. He said, "We've run into those folks who say, we're diverse enough. But I believe this is not just the will of God for our church because of the diversification of our community. It's the will of God for the church. I'm firmly convinced that the church in America is going to have to rapidly learn how to cross cultural barriers if we're going to be effective for the next generation. Especially among our urban centers, this is going to be something we need to learn and we need to pass on to the next generation." Hearn says it doesn't take any specialized training or knowledge to encourage diversity today. It just takes a heart to try. He encourages believers to do the same at their church by paying attention to the city outside your church walls, seeing where the community is, and then reaching out specifically to that community. Hearn's new book, Technicolor, is available wherever Christian books are sold.
God damn it, normally when you running from the law, you want to get a passport. Go to Canada, Brazil, Mexico. No, not Ray Ray. Ray Ray took his ass to Nashville.
In many police departments around the country, the majority of officers are white. In Nashville, they've been trying to change that, especially after a high-profile killing of a black driver by a white police officer back in February. As part of that effort, 45 black teenage boys got a behind-the-scenes look at the training academy this summer. Amy Eskind of member station WPLN in Nashville reports.
The Metro Police. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
This is the Metro Police Department.
A group of boys jogs backward from the police SWAT truck.
Whoa, that's loud. Imagine why is that so loud?
The teens stick their heads out of the turret and the questions fly at Sergeant Ryan Lockwood.
What's your worst experience with SWAT?
So basically the worst thing that we have to see is just what other people will do to each other. Does that make sense?
He wants these students to know policing is not a game. Bringing them here to the police academy was Lieutenant Dwayne Green's idea. He's a cop and a member of 100 Black Men, a nonprofit dedicated to help black boys succeed. Green says black youth commit a disproportionate share of teen crime, and he'd rather spark ambitions in law enforcement.
Many times people fear what they don't understand with bad press, bad media, or incidents that occur that may just end up being bad incidents. Puts a stigma on the profession of police, and it's unfortunate that it's happened, but we have to take a stance and say, we need you, we want you.
The police chief even sat down with the boys for a closed-door Q&A session. Building rapport is crucial, Green says, and the officers seem to enjoy showing the teenagers around the training academy. Officer Rodney Clark demonstrates crowd control from high up on the saddle of his horse, Bear.
So as you can see, this is a large animal. If he starts come walking towards you, you're going to move, right?
The boys check out the police helicopter and watch canine tricks, including a successful hunt for a hidden fugitive.
I'm going to train my dog like this.
Next, they role play as cops. They pack pistols loaded with blanks and take turns pulling over a speeding SUV. Mock drivers shout at them and pull guns, or look like they're going to. As Jace Locke, a high school senior, approaches a car, someone runs off. Locke draws his weapon. Captain Keith Stevens, the police training instructor, calls the students over.
Do you feel like you could sit on the stand and raise your right hand to say that you had to do that, to protect the life of yourself, your partner Frank, or the citizens of Nashville?
They just obeyed my order.
You cannot shoot just because they run. You can't shoot them in the leg. You can't shoot it off. So let's do that one again. How you say?
Yes, thank
you. Want to do that?
The boys learn the perspective of the police, and it's different to the views they had just a few minutes before. By the end of the day, Locke is convinced the police are the good guys.
They're here to protect us. The majority of them actually do care for us.
Police work isn't for everyone, but encouragement ruled the day. For the boy who said he can't ride a horse because he's black. For the teen who wondered how hard it is to fly a helicopter. For the student who didn't know there's no tuition bill for the training academy. They pay you. With minorities representing just 1 in 5 trainees this year, Nashville police hope to break tensions and inspire more non-whites to join the blue. For NPR News, I'm Amy Eskind.
When you're a cop, you can shoot a motherfucker by the trailer park. Plenty evidence, should have been, will we raise your shark? Then turn around and taste a perp, for blazing perp, I'm a cop.
The Minneapolis City Council could begin discussing as soon as this week what happens next with Mayor Betsy Hodges' choice to run the Minneapolis Police Department. If approved, Madeira Arredondo will become the city's first black police chief. Hodges wants Arredondo to replace former Chief Janae Harto, and Arredondo supporters say he is the right person for the job. Brett Williams has our story.
The first thing you should know about Acting Chief Madeira Arredondo is that nearly everyone calls him Rondo. Very soon, they may call him Chief Rondo. However, it hasn't taken long for Mayor Betsy Hodges to find out that not everyone applauds her decision to promote him.
Understand. For folks who are listening, I hear and understand.
A few minutes into her public Friday night announcement of Arredondo's promotion, a few dozen protesters filed in, demanding Hodges' own resignation. As they grew more boisterous, Hodges left the room.
Activist Mel Reeves, who is African-American, took over the podium and explained why he doesn't want Arredondo to be the next chief.
We understand that Chief Arredondo looks like us, right? But we understand that he's not one of us. That he works for a police department that has a history of brutalizing us.
Reeves and many others in the crowd of demonstrators have protested in the wake of the police shooting deaths of Terrence Franklin and Jamar Clark, 2 black men shot and killed by police officers under Harto's watch. They say what's needed is to knock down the institution of policing and rebuild it. Arredondo has been the name and face of the institution over the last week as he stood in for Chief Harto at press briefings to address developments in the Justine Ruszczyk shooting.
Good evening. I am Assistant Chief Madeira Arredondo of the Minneapolis Police Department.
For some, his promotion from assistant chief to chief is a logical one. Former Minneapolis police officer Elisa Clemens says she's a fan of Arredondo. Her brother, Alfred Flowers, is running for mayor. Clemens says Arredondo's promotion should make other black people feel proud.
And I think that it's insulting for us as African Americans to stand in a room and say, we don't want that appointment of an African American that would be the highest ranking African American in the city of Minneapolis, who has worked really hard to mend relationships.
On Friday night, after demonstrators left, Hodges returned to the podium. When asked why she didn't choose someone from outside the department, Hodges said Arredondo's resume and reputation were enough for her.
You know, it was clear to me that given the relationships that Assistant Chief, soon-to-be Chief Arredondo has, and the relationships he's been able to build in the community, that he is a very smart, positive leader for the future.
Arredondo is well-liked and respected by his colleagues. That's according to Police Federation President Lieutenant Bob Kroll.
If I had to pick one thing that may be Chief Arredondo's detriment is that he's almost too nice.
Arredondo was born and raised in Minneapolis. He joined the force in 1989 and slowly moved through the ranks. Harto appointed him as her assistant chief in April. Arredondo has had his own problems with the department. In 2007, he and 4 other black officers sued the department for racial discrimination. Attorney John Clausen represented Arredondo and the other officers. He says Arredondo is passionate about racial justice. Clausen says at first Arredondo was reluctant to follow through on the lawsuit because it could hurt his beloved police department and his hometown.
Because it was a hot-button flashpoint issue on race.
But Clausen says Arredondo wanted the city to take a serious look at racial discrimination in the department. The city settled the suit for $740,000. Arredondo could have taken his cut of the settlement and left, but he stayed. A few years ago, he told NPR News that as a kid growing up in Minneapolis, he heard stories from members of his community which illustrated the problems many black residents have with police. Arredondo said that inspired him to be part of the solution.
Someone told me a long time ago, it's much easier to be on the outside looking in and raising a concern about a problem. It's much more difficult to be that person on the inside to speak up, stand out, raise the issue, and still stay in there to try to change it for the better.
Arredondo is now poised to be the ultimate insider. The City Council could vote within the next several weeks on his appointment to fill out the remaining 18 months of Harto's term. Brant Williams, Minnesota Public Radio News, Minneapolis.
It's all old stuff. I mean, rehashed over and over again, talked about the same way. Look at the Kerner Commission report. You got a copy of that? Yeah, well, just read through it. Just glance through it. You don't even have to read the whole thing. It's a big, thick report. But it's all the same thing. Same thing they're saying now, same thing they were saying in 1968.
50 years ago this summer, race riots broke out in many American inner cities. In the aftermath, then-President Lyndon Johnson appointed a commission to figure out why. It was called the Kerner Commission, and its report came to a startling and controversial conclusion, to quote, "Our nation is moving towards 2 societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal." Last year, Lester Graham from Here and Now contributor Michigan Radio told us why the Kerner Commission's recommendations were ignored and why in an age of Black Lives Matter, the report's lessons still resonate. Today, we revisit Lester's story and a warning. It contains language that may upset some listeners.
It was called the Long Hot Summer. 1967 saw dozens of racial uprisings in cities such as Newark, Boston, and Detroit. And Detroit's was the worst. 43 people were killed and more than 1,000 injured, most of them black. Thousands of National Guard troops and police were already in the streets. The mayor and the governor wanted more help. President Lyndon Johnson sent in 5,000 U.S. Army troops.
I take this action with the greatest regret, and only because of the clear, the unmistakable, and the undisputed evidence that Governor Romney of Michigan and the local officials in Detroit have been unable to bring the situation under control.
Before the fires in Detroit were out, Johnson spoke to the nation again. He was appointing an 11-member advisory commission on civil disorders. It was chaired by then Illinois Governor Otto Kerner and became known as the Kerner Commission.
The commission will investigate the origins of the recent disorders in our cities. It will make recommendations to me, to the Congress, to the state governors, and to the mayors for measures to prevent or contain such disasters in the future.
The president wanted to know why. Why did these uprisings happen? Within 7 months, the Kerner Commission had an answer. Nathaniel R. Jones was Assistant General Counsel for the commission.
One of the conclusions of the Kerner report was that white racism was the cause of the upsets and the uprisings that we had. In fact, the report stated that white society created it, perpetuates it, and sustains it.
In other words, white racism, white attitudes were the underlying reasons for racial unrest in the cities. Many white politicians and news media vehemently resisted that finding. Detroit had been seen by the nation as a model of race relations. Blacks were getting jobs in Detroit that simply were not available to people of color in much of the rest of the country. Overlooked was the fact that Detroit African Americans often were given the hardest and dirtiest jobs, often were passed up for promotions, and generally made less money. Housing was inferior. Unemployment among people of color was higher. Relationships with police were strained.
The commission said in its report that there was a combination of complex social, psychological, poverty problems all tangled up, which create this feeling on the part of people that they can't trust authority. And that was true as a lead into what happened in the 60s, and it's true now.
The report's most quoted conclusion read, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal." Joe T. Darden is a professor at Michigan State University and co-author of a book on the 1967 Detroit riots. He says the Kerner report challenged whites' attitudes about blacks, and he says that made President Johnson worry it would damage the Democrats' chance to keep the White House. So publicly, Johnson barely acknowledged the report.
The report put the responsibility for all of this stuff on white society and white institutions. That, I think, was a surprise to some white Americans, and I think that was part of the reason he was very careful not to upset the large segment of white society. That was why I think that it happened like that.
Another factor in President Johnson's silence on the Kerner report was his own ego. He felt the report ignored the accomplishments of his Great Society programs. But in a 1969 interview for the LBJ Library, Commission Chair Otto Kerner said praising Johnson's work would give the report a political flavor the commission members did not want. Kerner said Johnson privately told him he was working quietly to implement Kerner report recommendations.
He says, we've been trying to do these things that you've recommended in the report. And as you know, Congress is not very acceptable to the things that I proposed. But he said, I want you to know that I have the members of the cabinet, the White House staff people are still trying to have accepted those things I've already recommended.
But that's not what Johnson told one of his political buddies. A phone call between Johnson and Chicago Mayor Richard J. Daley reveals Johnson had problems with the report. By then, Johnson had announced he would not seek another term as president, but his former Attorney General, Robert F. Kennedy, was running, and Kennedy pushed the Kerner report recommendations. Johnson also felt the commission's vice chair, New York Mayor John Lindsay, had pushed the commission too far.
And Bobby just gave me hell today for not carrying out the Kerner Commission study. Well, I didn't realize when I appointed Kerner that this son of a bitch from New York, Lindsay, would take charge. He did take charge, and he recommended I hire 2.5 million people on federal payroll. And I've not wanted to reflect on Kerner and criticize the commission. At the same time, I couldn't embrace it because I've got a budget.
That Johnson budget had doubled because of the Vietnam War. Nearly 5 decades later, that report by the Kerner Commission is still considered one of the most insightful documents on race relations and remedies for discrimination to ever be published by the government. Michigan State University professor Joe T. Darden says the cost of ignoring the Kerner report set opportunities for African Americans back decades.
That would have eliminated this separation where you have central city, suburb, white, suburb, black, central city, white affluent, black poverty. That would have prevented that. They didn't take that alternative. What the Kerner Commission really decided to do.
Some scholars argue that Americans, white Americans, have not learned the lesson of the 1960s uprisings or the recommendations to correct the problems.
In the wake of the Kerner report, we have created two societies that are deeply unequal. That is a fact.
Heather Ann Thompson is a professor at the University of Michigan and wrote the book Who's Detroit?
The inequality, income inequality, racial inequality, suburban, city inequality, job inequality, we could just go on and on and on, is far worse, and that is a deeply racialized inequality. So we've done that. The question remains, what do we do next?
Resentment surrounding issues of race has been building over those decades. Resentment among blacks who still find themselves at the bottom of the economic ladder, and resentment among whites who've been knocked down a rung or two. Paul Lee is a Detroit historian who's written on the 1967 uprising in Detroit. He says things are not any better today than they were in the 1960s, and perhaps worse. He says the protests we've seen in the last couple of years are revealing.
Our situation, that is the situation of African Americans in Detroit and throughout the country, I think is much more precarious than it's been perhaps in a century.
The reason, says Lee, is the shaky economic underpinnings of black neighborhoods. Few blacks own their own homes, a significant factor in building wealth. The relatively few middle-class black families who could afford it later followed white families to the suburbs. With them went black businesses. The little economic power African Americans had slipped away. But there was optimism, because in some cities, political power grew for black Americans. Black mayors and city council members were elected. But Paul Lee says political power is limited.
While I think that black political power is important, I think that if there's no economic foundation, then black power is relatively meaningless. Black political power is relatively meaningless.
The shift from black power in the 1960s to today's Black Lives Matter seems to be slipping from a demand to have a seat at the table to the request, please don't kill us. But Black Lives Matter isn't the only protest movement. In Detroit, dating back to at least the takeover by an emergency manager and then bankruptcy, new groups have been raising their voices in and around the city. There are protests for economic inclusion, against foreclosures and water shutoffs, and against police brutality.
No racist police! No racist police!
We're skeptical of government because government isn't serving us.
Reverend Charles Williams II is the president of the Michigan chapter of National Action Network. He says people are frustrated that in many ways life in Detroit is worse now than it was in 1967.
As we see our struggle today, we see that some of those same issues are ahead of us. And so this is the reason why we must continue to organize, and it's the reason why we continue to organize.
Heather Ann Thompson, the University of Michigan professor, says policymakers today largely are ignoring issues in the same way policymakers ignored them in the 1960s.
The good news is that we now, I think, are really hearing from those people who have suffered this very directly. And that's why Ferguson has blown up. And that's why Baltimore has exploded. And that's why people across cities in America or cities across America are speaking out and saying, no, we need a different civil rights movement, right? We need a different moment of change.
And to be effective, that change will have to negotiate opportunities for African Americans to be included in both political and economic power, just as the Kerner Report recommended nearly 5 decades ago. For Here and Now, I'm Lester Graham.
And Bill McGraw from Bridge Magazine helped with the reporting on this story. We also had production assistance from the Oral History Project at the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library in Austin, Texas.
The gay rights movement is changing everything.
On July 26, 1948, Harry S. Truman, the 33rd President of the United States of America, signed Executive Order 9981, which put an end to segregation in the armed forces. On July 26, 2017, Donald J. Trump, the 45th President, fired off a couple tweets saying that the U.S. government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. The whole thing is such a transparent desperation move from the president to shore up political points after the debacle that was the Boy Scouts Jamboree, but sacrificing the dignity of the very people who protect our nation is a pretty shameful low. If you want to fight for this country and all of its freedoms, you should be allowed to, period. I'm Clinton Yates, and that's my take.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Saturday, July 29th, 2017. So I have been told. This is our weekly compensatory call-in. Dial in if you have thoughts on any of the audio clips we just heard, news, events that took place over the last week or so, observations, counter-racist suggestions. Feel free, the number to dial 641-715-3640, the code 564-943 pound. Press *6 if you would like to participate. That number again, 641-715-3640, the code 564-943 pound. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Quickly, before we get to the callers, this broadcast, listener-supported counter-racist radio. Invest if you think the C.O.W.S is constructive. You can hit the blog racism-notes.blogspot.com. racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal button is in the top right corner. If you're not into PayPal, drop us an email. We can get you a physical mailing address. Everyone should drop an email just to verify that you have the correct mailing information. Moved a couple times since the beginning of the year just to make certain that you have accurate info. Huge thanks to all the folks who have supported, invested, who have kept the C.O.W.S broadcasting for almost a decade. I hope we have and continue to share constructive information and, most importantly, accurate information on what racism, white supremacy is, how it works. Specifically, folks have also helped out a lot with the wish list. One thing that I have been really poor at for the duration of my time hosting here at the C.O.W.S, self-care. I'd said that was one thing that I wanted to do, to work on, do better. I think all of us can do more in that area. That's why we have situations. Gwen Ifill, we read her book, passing away in her early 60s. Nelson Ellis, black male actor who was in Little Boxes and True Blood, passing away at 39 earlier this summer. That's why we have these types of instances. Even Dr. Welsing passing. She was not that old. Certainly not old enough to be passing away from all the stress and strife that she and we experience under the system of white supremacy. Self-care is monumentally important. I have been trying to use my wish list for self-care. I have not slept well for the duration of my time under the system of white supremacy all the time I've been on this planet. I think that's true for a lot of other black people. I've talked about my difficulties sleeping, so I've been trying to get better bedding. I never thought of that. I am a victim of white supremacy. I've been greatly retarded, but I never thought, why not try to get the most comfortable bedding possible since you have such difficulty sleeping, to see if that helps with some of, my sleep issues. And thus far, it has. I got just amazing sheets. I've only had them for a few days. I used my wish list at Amazon.com under Gus T Renegade to get just an awesome pillow, actually two really awesome pillows, and it has helped a lot on many fronts, because now, since I have such wonderful, comfortable bedding, I'm much more eager and excited about going to bed, and then once I get there, I'm a lot more comfortable and sleeping better. So that's something I'm trying to do. Even one of our listeners suggested that not very long ago, that one of the things we can do under the system of white supremacy, since there's so much terrorism awaiting you, as we heard, going to a school board meeting, going to a restaurant, working, whether you're going there as a patron or if you're going to work your shift as a waiter, terrorism is waiting for you. So try to make things as comfortable as possible at your residence, so that you can get things done, so that you can replenish, repair, and be ready to do battle as soon as you step outside of your door seal. Amazon.com, Gus T Renegade, the wish list. Thanks for the folks who have supported there as well. Self-care, extremely important. Also, being serious. Anytime that you discuss racism, white supremacy, it should be something that you take very seriously. That's something that was impressed upon me when I first really began to study racism, white supremacy, and Mr. Fuller's concepts, Dr. Welsing's concepts. I think many people said they were always so impressed by them being so serious. I think Mr. Edward Williams, lots of other folks, Cree and her program, even folks going way back, before, talk about the civil rights movement here, and Minister Malcolm X and other folks, Fannie Lou Hamer, that they seemed so serious about what they were doing, even if they were just talking with other black people. It wasn't a life or death situation, just very, very serious. And I think that's something that I would encourage. I say that just myself. I never had the thought in my mind of writing and saying, oh, I could be a freelance journalist. Like, this came to mind. Someone wrote me this week, and they were asking me about writing on deadlines, which I have to do for Atlanta Black Star, and if I had any tips for writing. And I was just like, wow, that is crazy. I'm sure some of my English teachers would be like, Lord Jesus, call anyone else but him if you want tips for writing. And I would have said that, maybe 5 years ago, maybe not even that long ago. But I say all that just, take things seriously. I'd be years ago, even before I started doing the cows, when I was just writing about racism, I try to take that seriously, not seriously as I'm, gonna someday hope that I can, make a few nickels writing, or that someone will hire me and say, we want you to write for this publication or that publication. Not in that sense, but just that this is not something that I'm going to play with. I'm going to take this as though this is very, very serious, as though some of the most important people in the world are going to read what I have to say about this, and that this is going to substantially influence the way that people are thinking about and responding to racism, white supremacy, counter-racism. Just having that in mind, if we can all take it very seriously, I think that can have great ramifications. It can have great consequences for you, constructive consequences for you, just taking things seriously. That was something that came to mind just this week, just looking at how all of that evolved. And I think a big part of how I've been able to write more is just taking it seriously. Try to take whatever you're doing seriously. If you're making YouTube videos, take it seriously, particularly if it deals with racism. Next, we had a broadcast yesterday. I mentioned it on my Facebook page, and the end of the program yesterday, our debut book study on Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. We haven't even got to Fanon's actual words. We just did the preface, so if you missed out, you can start right with us next week. Chapter 1, preface out of the way, Chapter 1, next Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern. But the tail end of the broadcast was interrupted by my furry canine pal who is hanging out for the next month. I'm babysitting him. I got some tips from listeners. I'm not a pet person. I'm not a dog fan. And even having him here because he's so spoiled. I've mentioned him before. He's a Yorkie, very small. I even overestimate. I do what white people do to black people, right? Like I said, he was 10 pounds. He's not even 10 pounds. He's about 7 pounds, maybe. He might even be a little less than that, but very, very, very tiny. Like, you can pick him up with one hand and, carry him around the room easy. He's easily smaller than a loaf of bread. But I have to take care of him for the next, even actually it's a little over a month. He's already been hanging out for almost a week, and he is so spoiled. Like, he eats better than probably most black people on the planet. Like, he generally gets whatever food his owners are eating at the time. If that's steak or ribs or whatever else they're eating, generally he will get some of that in addition to his normal doggy kibbles and what have you. He gets to sleep in the bed and, just run amok. He's super, super spoiled, but having to watch after him for the next month just reminded me, like, I'm totally in opposition to pets. I just think it's a waste of resources. I remember Chinweezu. He's one of our former guests on the program. He resides on the continent. He's written many tremendous books about racism, white supremacy. One of them, The West and the Rest of Us. It starts with how white people allow little furry critters like the one I'm minding to drop like tons of dog feces out in public and parks and streets and everything. And that has to be cleaned up and messes up all kinds of things. They allow this use of time and energy that could be put to, we could do something to solve some of the problems that black people have. We could do something to work against racism as opposed to going out and buying squishy dog bones and what have you. And I'm sure there's some people out there that have pets, but that's just in terms of priorities. How are we going to expend? We have a limited amount of time and energy. We have a massive problem confronting black people. How are we going to use our resources? Squishy dog bones? Helping black people. That's the way that I'm looking at it. Maybe I'm not being logical. And in my travels, I talked to other people in different parts of the world. And I remember specifically talking to folks in Brazil. Excuse me, they were from Brazil. We were in Hawaii, talking to folks from Brazil about dogs. And they were saying that back in Brazil that they were not around people who had dogs just to hang out and feed them steak and ribs and lobster and all that, that was absurd. That people there, if they had dogs, they were for security purposes, just to keep, people from intruding and robbing their house type of a thing. Not, just because I want to love and kiss on the dog and share a milkshake with him. But I'm totally in opposition. Just want to make sure I get that on the record while I am babysitting this super spoiled canine for the next month and change. Finally, other things that Gus is in opposition to, or it's not even, like I'm in opposition. I don't, hate the dog or anything. It's just about how we're using our time and energy. That segment about the abuses of black children in the Seattle high school athletic program, man, I've said I'm in Seattle. I've been in Seattle for years now. I know retired firefighter has called in before and talked about the outstanding counter-racist work that he does, working with black coaching staff and working with young black children with football, and that he's done this for years, and that he tries to use it in the most constructive manner to share information with them, whether it's about racism or helping them out with school and just helping teach them constructive things about life and black self-respect. Phenomenal. I am sure, and I don't want to I don't want to speak for retired firefighter. I can speak for myself, but I'm willing to wager that even he would concur that a lot of the folks who get into high school athletics do not have the same agenda that he does. I might even say that the bulk of the folks who get involved with high school athletics do not have the same agenda that he does. I'm of the opinion it would be phenomenal if we totally divested black children from athletics. That is appalling and disgusting. You're taking black children all the way from Texas to come way up here. I mean, Seattle is far. It is way off the map. I mean, that's like 1,000 miles, like Texas, Louisiana, to come all the way up here in super, super white Seattle. And even in that clip they made it, they said that the coaching staff at the high school Garfield, which is in the central district, used to be where all the black people are, but that's been quote unquote gentrified. But they made it seem like it was the black coaches who were doing this. Man, it's nothing that happens anywhere on the plantation of white supremacy where white supremacists directly, indirectly are not involved. And it's no way you're going to tell me when black people are struggling to keep, 2 inches of anything in the central district where Garfield High School is, you're going to tell me that these black coaches have got some criminal syndicate where they can just funnel and pipeline black children from all over the country to come up here. Get out of here. White people are involved in some way, shape, or form. And regardless, that would be enough for me to say, you know what, there's nothing about this that my child needs to be involved in. For them to be beaten up, bruised, concussion, for what? For what? To make white people, to entertain them while I get bruised and busted up at a young age? Forget it. No way. I was so happy this week when I saw John Erskine, the Ravens football player, retired. He saw the results that said that all of the brains that they looked at of athletes who played football, they had brain damage. And he said, forget it. I'm 26. I got I have a brilliant black mind. I think he's pursuing a PhD in math at MIT. Forget it. I'm hanging up my cleats. Y'all can have this stuff. We should take the same attitude, and I say collectively for all of the sports. It's super unlikely. You're going to be the next LeVar Ball. Your daughter's going to be the next Serena Williams. Your son is going to be the next LeBron James. It is super. It's more likely for you to find a good white person than that sort of thing happening. Let it go. It's way too much damage done to black people. That, I think, would fast forward our use of time and energy, just talking about our priorities. That said, folks would like to participate. If you could hold your commentary to 5 minutes, that way everybody gets one opportunity to share. And then once everybody gets their chance, then you can share your additional thoughts. If you know you're in a loud environment, if you could use your mute button, that would be super appreciated. If you got the TV on, or if other people talking and what have you, just mute yourself. And then when you're ready to talk, unmute. Say whatever you need, and then you can mute again. That just helps preserve the quality of the program. I'd like to ask for this program specifically if we could not use metaphors. That's exclusive to the Compensatory Call-In. Racists, Crystal Tyler and the gang, they, in my view, deliberately use metaphors and make comparison between items that are not equivalent. That's how they practice deception. Victims of white supremacy, we have had racists model this behavior. Also, we are still learning. A lot of times we've not come to conclusions in terms of what we think about certain ideas, so we will use a metaphor and hope that that accurately conveys our thoughts. Often it does not. If we could be explicit, direct about what it is we are trying to say, super appreciated. I will prompt about that as well. Much obliged. The number again, 641-715-3640, and the code 564943 #. Press *6 if you would like to participate. First few folks who dialed in with a hand up, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Because the white people have been messing with my internet all day. Good evening, Gus, to the callers and the listeners. This is a black female caller from New York. I don't even have 5 minutes worth of stuff. I just wanted to encourage Gus for his efforts with his furry friend, and hope it works out well. I do have a furry friend too, but mine is for protection, and I get it. Just want to relate to you on that level. First, regarding Howard University, first of all, I just want to say Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, peace be upon her. Listening to that story made me think about her and her struggles that she had with whites wanting her to leave her residence that she had been in for so many years, and the noise level that she had to deal with, and the gentrification of D.C. in general, which was one of my favorite cities while I was closer. I live in South Carolina now, but I used to make trips there all the time. And when I found out about her having her lectures at Howard University through listening to the cows, I made even more trips. I had the pleasure of seeing her lecture at Howard 3 times. So I just wanted to say that the reporter mentioned a metaphor. Again, Gus, you're right on time with that. In that segment, he compared something to a bag of Skittles. And I just wanted to say that I just have not heard any reference to Skittles in the context of racism since our departed young brother, Trayvon Martin, lost his life at the hands of the racist in Florida there. And, I just, nothing, the bag of Skittles and the racism, that the metaphor pops up all over the place. And I just concur with that story because the last time I was in D.C., one of my favorite spots to go to there on U Street, which is no longer what it was, Ben's Chili Bowl. And I remember years ago, I used to be able to go to Ben's Chili Bowl, sit down at the counter down there by the jukebox, if anybody's familiar with Ben's Chili Bowl. I never got table service. I always sat by the jukebox and just fill it up and, just listen to music. And there was always a lot of black people in there. And the last time I went there, I almost wanted to cry. It was horrible. It was just absolutely horrible. It was like being downtown in the middle of Times Square. It was really, really bad, and the only black people, the blackest thing in there was me, the jukebox, and the people that worked there. That was it. Everybody else was white. And they're standing there and staring, and it was just like the Statue of Liberty. And it was really bad. And I just felt like, I just feel really bad about D.C. It really was one of my favorite places to go, especially to get my go-go music fix and stuff. All of that is gone. Also, with regard to I just wanted to share that Walmart story a couple of weeks ago with the Scully, the wig cap, and Nigger Brown. 2 days later, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal saying, I don't know if we discussed this on the show, Gus, saying how Walmart is coming out with a facial recognition program. So I think that was all, I believe it was all an experiment because, that's what whiteys do. They do this to see how they can gauge their future endeavors. So, with facial recognition programs in order to improve customer service, you need a baseline for that. What greater baseline than to have to put out an insult and to watch people's faces so that you can get that data to enhance your program. So I just kind of, when that came out, it came out 2 days later after the Nigger Brown skull cap was featured on their website. So I just thought that was not a coincidence, that was an experiment used to further their efforts. And one more thing, and the Boy Scouts Jamboree and banning transgenders from the military. Boy Scouts, that just screams transgender and homosexuality to me. So, that's all a part of his madness, his plan there too. And with his visit to New York with the police officers and saying that, basically, I endorse you guys using your nigger knockers. Don't protect their heads, just do what you got to do. So I don't know. This is like a rogue presidency, and, I think he's doing this, toss the ball over here. No, toss the ball over here. And I'm going to say this, and I've heard Pam say this, something else is afoot. This says this isn't about firing people. This isn't about homosexuals. This is about something else. And he's doing this Pavlov's dog thing, ringing a bell over here, ringing a bell to get everybody's energy on a certain frequency. But I don't think that it has anything necessarily to do with anything constructive or him being the president. I think there's some other greater plan, but that's just me. I could be incorrect. And that's all I had to share. Thank you for listening.
Appreciate that. Interesting theory about the Walmart experiment. And Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, absolutely a victim of Washington, D.C.'s quote-unquote gentrification, racial dislocation. Gus T. essay coming about that shortly. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, line should be open. And Dr. Vanessa Grubbs will be here on Monday. I forgot all about that. She wrote that book on organ transplants. The book is called Hundreds of Interlaced Fingers. She came to Seattle about 2 weeks ago, and I wrote a piece about her coming here, and she said she did not want to talk about racism. She called Gus T militant. She will be hanging out on the cows Monday evening. Be curious. I'm debating whether or not to send her the essay that I wrote about her visit beforehand so she can read it and I can ask her about it, or just to wait and ask her on the program. We'll see. You all can share an opinion on that if you care. Other people that dialed in with the hand up line should be open. Proceed.
Hey, how you doing, Gus?
Right poorly.
All right. I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted, and I guess you can apply VGQ. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I know that name calling black explainers or if you want to call them sympathizers, others use the C word to shame these black people who kind of explain and side with white rhetoric. But I mean, in my opinion, and I'm asking a question. You know how? I mean, but how do you address or interact with blacks who seem to side with openly white supremacists? I mean, whether it's your Sheriff Clarks, Amarosas or your Ben Carsons. I mean, how do you combat that? How do you basically interact with people of like minds? I'm just having problems with that because I know the wider fight are the white supremacists, but in front of them are how can I say your black palmers. So I mean, how do
metaphor?
Metaphor. Are they a problem? Are they a problem that needs to be dealt with? As far as we also have to deal with open white supremacy.
I asked at the beginning of the program if we could not use metaphors, and we've had a lot of metaphors already. If we could be mindful of the metaphors, and I have noted a correlation between metaphors and what I perceive to be anti-blackness over the years. To your question about black people who have the same opinion or sympathize with, side with racist man, racist woman, racist child. In terms of how do we quote unquote interact with them, I'm not really sure what you mean. I'd be willing to wager a sizable amount that you are not like daily in contact, like where you actually can touch Ben Carson or any of the other people that you are talking about that you named specifically. So I don't really know what you mean. It's not like you're around these people to like, even if you were upset and were like, oh, I'm gonna put them in the headlock right now and pop them upside the head until they get their act together. You're not around these people to do that. So I'm not even really sure what is the issue exactly.
No, what I want to say. Okay, Kate, like for instance, like I dabble on social media, right? And a gentleman that I interact with in the gym. So he put a post up, and it was a quote from Sheriff Clark, right? And it's basically saying that, in a nutshell, before we tackle racism, I mean, what he say? I'm trying to get the quote together. Before you attack the police, before you fix the police department, fix the ghetto. All right. So that's clearly somebody that I interact with that agrees with Sheriff Clark's ideology. So me personally, I really don't engage in talks of racism or politics with that particular gentleman. But if the conversation were to come up, I already know what ideology he's going with, and he's also a police officer, he's a black man. So, not saying that I'm going to interact with Sheriff Clark or Ben Carson, but other African Americans or blacks or melanated people that agree with that ideology. You know what I mean? So that's mainly what I'm speaking of. I know I would never come in earshot or of Sheriff Clark.
Okay.
But blacks who kind of sympathize with or agree with that ideology.
My recommendation, I would say any non-white person who is surprised that a sizable number of non-white people sympathize with, quote unquote, racist man, racist woman, racist child, you do not understand racism. That should not be surprising. And really, I would say, I mean, if we're looking at the problem, dealing with white supremacists or dealing with Ben Carson, Sheriff Clark, this individual that you mentioned who made his post about, before we deal with the police, let's deal with the ghetto, like in comparison, there is no comparison, in my view, in terms of the problem that we have to stay focused on being white people. Those folks, this person, it sounds like you're not having a daily conversation, like he's not threatening violence against you or what have you. Sounds like you all aren't even having a direct conversation. I would really make an effort to minimize the amount of time and energy that I spend being frustrated with other non-white people, particularly black people. I think that's a big part of the system. In my view, I've said, I don't know how many sheriffs there are in North America. If anybody could find out the number of sheriffs there are in North America, I would appreciate that bit of information. How in the hell is Sheriff Clark the most well-known sheriff in the United States? How can that, in Wisconsin of all places, he's not even in like a cracking place to be. In my view, that right there is the system of white supremacy. They are great at being able to broadcast and put up black people that, yes, getting mad, yes, fuss at Sheriff. We'll call him names, and when you get tired of him, we'll find somebody else that you can put up. They can do this as long as the system of white supremacy exists. The way you stop all of that is to recognize I'm going to minimize the amount of time that I invest in this, given the problem we have with racist man, racist woman, racist child. That would be my recommendation.
You know what?
Hang on one second. I want to see if other people, if they can respond to your question or your problem, because this is something that we have addressed many times. Many people get frustrated, the same frustration. We have other folks who have not commented at all. If you have comments that you want to address, and then once we get everybody, we can come back to you, sir, and you can add more if you need to. Other folks we haven't heard from at all? Yes, sir. Other folks we haven't heard from at all?
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hey, how you doing, Gus? Brother Gus?
Right, poorly, and called me, I've asked people not to call me brother for years.
Oh, you have? Okay, bro. Gus.
Yes, sir.
My name is Thomas Giss. Maybe you're familiar with me. I've been a fan of yours for many years. And are you?
I think we have seen each other's posts on Facebook, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Okay. I was just wondering. Basically, I have a question that I've wanted to ask for many years. I wanted to ask Dr. Welsing personally, or Dr. or Neely Fuller. And since they're not on the show, and I called you, and maybe you can answer by being an associate of them for many years, and help me to get a better understanding, because over the years, I want to emphasize that you have helped me tremendously to understand white supremacy, expanded my thinking, pointed me in the direction of people who who might know other avenues or other topics that you might not have covered. So I really want to let you know that I really appreciate your work, and I'm looking forward. I'll hopefully in one future day that we can work together, because I feel like you're one of the foremost experts in the country on this subject. But getting to my question, are you still there, Gus? Hello?
We are listening.
Hello? Oh, okay. Well, basically, I wanted to ask you that this is something that's really been on my mind, but anyway, my question is, I've heard of Dr. Welsing, Neely Fuller, and Umar Johnson, Dr. Umar Johnson, Dr. Henry Clark, and Dr. Ani. And they talked about the subject of people who had a white parent and a black parent. I don't know. I've heard them described by Neely Fuller and Dr. Welsing as being black. However, the people on Dr. Ani, Dr. Clark, and Dr. Umar Johnson do not consider those people black. And so I was wondering, what am I missing here? As far as, it seems like the consciousness, and I don't know if that's the correct term, but the consciousness community seems to be divided on this subject. Maybe you can help me.
The only thing I can say is that they said what they said. I mean, these are all the people that you mentioned. They're all non-white people, so they have their opinion. They have their view on racial classifications of these people. That's very, very common. Non-white people around the world have a variety of different opinions on racism, white supremacy, and racial classification, since that's what you're talking about. No, that also shouldn't be much of a surprise on the subject that you're talking about. And there is not consensus on that, and there's not going to be consensus on that as long as white supremacy exists. And in my view, there doesn't need to be. So that's not one that I do a lot of hand-wringing about, because people have different views on those subjects. I know Dr. Umar, he was on this program specifically, and he talked about that subject matter when he visited us in 2016. He talked about that subject specifically. And I guess the final part, that was all I was going to say, but the final part I would put to your question, the most important thing in my view to keep in mind, racist man, racist woman, racist child, they do the classifying that matters, in my view. That is the most important thing to keep in mind, not the opinion of non-white people, victims of racism. I have my opinions about racial classifications. In my view, it is extremely important to keep in mind racists. What classification do they say this person has? Other folks that we have not heard from at all, if you have your own commentary that you would like to share, or if you want to respond to any of the questions that have been posed, feel free. Line should be open.
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Hi, I am greetings, Gus, greetings to the listeners. I am a black male in Texas. I would like to share an incident that I experienced yesterday evening that might bring some understanding to some of the commentary that has been stated. I was waiting in line at a venue. It was early in the evening. I was alone, and I was sober, as I have heard you speak about this numerous times, and I actually came to the same conclusion for myself, for a lot of different reasons, specifically in that unless I'm going to be around someone who is willing to take my place with their life, then I'm not going to be inebriated. And then I have further concluded that sobriety, being lucid of thought, is the best way to conduct oneself. There was a non-white, non-black woman in front of me while I was waiting in line at this venue. And then a friend of hers who was also non-white, non-black came across the parking lot, and he was stumbling a little bit. He was obviously inebriated. And he fell on her, and she propped him up, and they giggled and they laughed. And the man, who was probably about 6 inches taller than I am, he looked at me and he began to point and he laughed, and I maintained my composure, and then he reached out towards me to grab me, and I stepped back. And as is often the case with inebriated people, there's something about grabbing and contact and horseplay, and I've never been one for horseplay ever in my life. My standard for horseplay is that unless you can speak intelligently about the most important parts of my life, I don't joke with you. And even then, I am not really a joking individual. And he said, "It's okay, bro. Come here. Come here." And I stepped back again. He got even closer to try to touch me, and I said, "Do not touch me." And he said, "Well, what's going on? We're friends. Come here. Come here." He reached for me again, and I stepped back very quickly. There are people behind me now whom I stumbled into. And I said, "Do not touch me." The woman he was with grabbed him and turned him around, and she told him, "Don't worry about that, gentleman. Just we'll get in." She propped him up, and she turned around to me, and she looked at me, and she said, "Why can't he touch you?" To which I stated to her, I said, "Do you feel comfortable with people you don't know touching you?" She said, "It's not a big deal. He can touch you." I said, "Ma'am, I am not your slave. I don't know why you feel entitled to touch me." And then she said, "See, that right there is the issue." I said, "What is the issue?" She said, "That is the issue why racism still exists." She said, "This is why you guys have a problem." I said, "Which problem?" "The problem of us being shot in the street by police." And during this moment in the conversation, there were probably 20 more individuals behind us. Most of them would classify themselves as black. And they became very astute and aware of what was going on. And she continued, well, let me be more specific. Her next words were, "I have a friend, a woman who is blacker than you are, and you just made it harder for her." And then she turned around and faced the front of the line. We get closer towards the line, and the individual, the man who was working at the venue who was taking tickets, he grabbed those two outside of the line and told them that they were not allowed to enter. He said that they were too inebriated, they needed to go somewhere else. This man saw everything that occurred, and he told me to have a good night. He smiled. I got inside the venue. I had a good time. And there were other individuals who saw what occurred outside, who smiled, and they greeted me, and they said, "I like how you handled that." Now, that is their opinion, whether that was handled well or not. But to the question is as far as the previous caller who was speaking about Ben Carson and these handful of other individuals who would not classify themselves as white, whom seem to be supporting white supremacy, that is by design. And what I mean by design is there have been certain cases by the Supreme Court in which racism has been the topic, and they have concluded that unless you can prove beforehand intent and that these occurrences are 100%, not excluding one, then you cannot consider it racism. So this is where we get the term in, I'm not trying to use metaphor, but the term is called token. hopefully that you won't consider that a metaphor, but it is a way in which racists can say, see, we are not racist, because we can point to at least one. The other conclusion that I have come to for myself is that unless peoples have a long history in this hemisphere of the world specifically, so I'm speaking about indigenous peoples, Native Americans, descendants of African chattel slaves, then they are not as attuned to how this works. So you will get other individuals of different backgrounds who are non-white, whom believe they know. And what I have found is that racists will attach themselves to these people to be a part of the propaganda. They don't intend for them to achieve full inclusion into the ranks, but they are used as tools. And so that is the incident that I would share. I have something else that I would like to share, but I will let other callers get a chance to respond. And that is all that I have to say for now. Thank you.
Sobriety would be best. Great job. That is probably going to be a lot more of those. We had talked about it with, having lots of whites who are under the influence of alcohol, drugs, all kinds of toxins, to be very alert when you are out and about, because that sort of thing, it could easily happen to you. But great job. Sobriety would be best, in my view. Great job, sir. Other folks who we have not heard from at all, if you have a hand up, line should be open.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, this is Red from Ohio. Thank you for taking my call, and hello to everyone. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. I have a lot to share. So in my continued research about the opioid epidemic, opioid white people epidemic here in Ohio, I've noticed just by looking at different newspapers, mainly my focus has been around the Columbus Dispatch. It seems like just over the past several weeks, they've gone from basically describing the opioid epidemic. Then they spoke about, like I've spoken on other compensatory calls, they've spoken about, or they've written about the Narcan, which I've also spoken about. And I've actually started to keep an eye out on the stocks. Thank you for actually letting me know the company. And then recently, they've been kind of profiling whites who have basically gotten over their addiction, and now are more productive. And I also noticed in like the more recent papers where now they're trying, I feel like it's definitely like a long, I don't know, like a trilogy, basically. And in the most recent, one of the most recent parts of this long story, they've actually listed medications that will help different opioid users or opioid addicts, which I thought was definitely very interesting. I don't recall hearing anything like that being put in papers or actually put like mass produced for people to get this knowledge, when, of course, drug epidemics were affecting non-whites, specifically Black people. So I definitely thought that was very interesting. And also just in other papers, they even pinpointed opioid treatment programs within Ohio. And just driving down the street one day, I noticed that there was this medical facility that had been a medical facility, like a family medical facility. I feel like it was mainly for Medicaid and Medicare, low-income families, basically, because it is very close to a predominantly Black neighborhood. And it was closed down, I feel like, somewhere around the beginning of this year. And then when I drove down the street recently by that facility, it was turned into a treatment and recovery facility, which I thought was very interesting because the neighborhood is still predominantly Black. it's not been completely gentrified yet. The one thing I want to say about the clips really quick before I get to my other information about Ohio, I thought that the clip about the teens and the interactions with the police and basically trying to show them what the police go through, I definitely thought that was just promoting more confusion and just trying to make, I feel like they were definitely trying to make these black teens, these black male teens, more sympathetic towards police, the people who are more likely to hurt them. I kind of feel like it reminds me of Norman Stanford's book, Breaking Ranks. I actually had the audio book, and I thought that he was definitely practicing racism in the beginning of the book, because he kind of talks about this fictitious scenario where I cannot remember the race soldier's name that killed Michael Brown, but Darren Wilson. So he talked about this fictitious scenario where Darren Wilson knew Mike Brown before he killed Mike Brown, and instead of killing him, he just kind of talked him down, basically talked down the situation and took him to the jail, but he didn't actually get locked up. He was just basically trying to scare him into being a better person. So that kind of reminded me of that part of Norm Stanford's book, and I thought it was interesting how the NPR correspondent, or whatever you would call the person, used the term non-white. Back to my information about Ohio. So in the most recent Sunday paper, there was an article about the NAACP feeling like the inclusion programs are not inclusive enough, or are overly inclusive. As I was reading the article, I found out that the person who wrote it was a suspected racist, and I say this because, and I feel like the NAACP representative, her name, it's N.A. Watson. It could be pronounced Nana or Nona, but it seemed like she was not as confused as other people, or not as confused about racism. In the article, she was basically arguing, or not arguing, but basically trying to put forth her side about having blacks being more included. I'm sorry, did you say something? Maybe that's me. Maybe my phone is messing up. So having blacks more included in getting government contracts, so on and so forth. There are a few things that she said is that, she was here specifically to talk about blacks, which I thought was very interesting. Usually people with political positions, they try to remain as inclusive as possible. She also, one of the things that I definitely appreciated about her was that she said that when it came to government contracts or giving people a shares, she felt that too many people were being classified as minorities, and she specifically said, you have people, just like some of the other callers had just recently stated, or that you have Asian people, you have whites who are disabled, and in the article she spoke about the LGBTQ community now being a part of minorities and them actually getting a share of minority contracts, which she didn't feel that was correct. And in the article, this racist suspect, he said that, in the article, they had quoted the first black Franklin County commissioner, and the Franklin County commissioner said that she would be an effective leader. Okay, she would be an effective leader, and the article, and the person who wrote the article said that she would be an effective leader even if she upset some people or more. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you for listening.
Wow. Amphastar Pharmaceuticals, that is the company that makes Narcan. If folks want to do counter-racist investing, it's dipped a little bit. It's about 17.5 per share. If you want to buy it, still looks good. I think I'm going to invest, get a few shares, see what happens. White people, I don't think, are going to give up their drug addiction. And I have my books. I don't even have all of them. I have almost all of my books racked for the first time in about a year. With all of the moves and craziness. But for anyone, if you have 100 books or more and you've not had them shelved in a while, man, it can be difficult trying to track things down. But so I have my books back. Norm Stamper, the book that she's referencing, is not Breaking Rank. It's To Protect and Serve, How to Fix America's Police. I have it because now my books are racked. I can easy access. The portion she's talking about, he starts with this nonsense tale where Darren Wilson is talking to Michael Brown, and Wilson says, as he removes the cuffs from Michael Brown inside the new Sally Port of the city jail at police headquarters, I'll have a talk with the prosecutor, not making any promises, but it might help. But you gotta know what you did in that store was bad, real bad. You gotta promise no more. Word? And then he goes on and he skips down a little bit, and later on it says, Officer Darren Wilson continues his career as a Ferguson police officer and earns praise from the African American community for his spirit of cooperation, his sensitivity, and compassion. Norm Stamper, To Protect and Serve, also gave us Nigger Knocker. He got 2 references today. Other folks we have not heard from at all. Line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir, Mr. Steele.
Yeah, this is Ken Steele, and just by looking at the signs that are posted around, I am assuming that I'm in Koreatown in Los Angeles, California. And I guess this week I wanted to make a comment about something that I've been hearing suspected white supremacists talk about since I was a young child, and that is this whole, I guess, process of natural decrease. There has been new, news that has come about from researchers in Israel that have concluded that the sperm counts of males in so-called Western countries, that is United States, New Zealand, Australia, Western Europe, and Canada, are decreasing. And in the past, I believe since the 1970s, sperm counts in males in these areas have halved, and in some cases decreased up to 60% when compared to those previous readings. The study also concluded that sperm counts for males in other regions have not decreased. That is, regions in Asia, Africa, South America, they have not decreased at all when compared in this study. Now, anytime I've seen this story be reported, it has been reported that this is an existential crisis for all humanity, not just the so-called males in the so-called Western countries. This is an existential crisis for the entire world. And they use the word human a lot. And just from the way that these stories have been reported about this situation, I've come to the conclusion that the word human is to be interpreted as white. People, when they're being discussed by the suspected racists, anytime they're using the word human, they're discussing white people. And that leads to, phrases like, we are all humans, there's one race, the human race, and they talk about humankind and humanity. In their minds, that word is only being used to describe white people. And this is something that they're very afraid of. They have the way that they're reporting this. It's kind of a muted screen. they are ringing. I don't want to use the metaphor. They are basically using very alarmist language when reporting this news story. And they don't even go into the idea or the reality that non-white people are not suffering from this, or they don't openly discuss it. They just discuss it from a perspective of this is a crisis for all humanity. And I don't know. I personally interpreted this as just the earth cleansing itself of, I guess, very harmful invaders. And, I don't see a problem with this story at all. And also, I just wanted to touch on the fact that lately they have been going extra, they have been making a point to focus on these LGBT community. There's been a number of government actions been done to kind of curtail their position throughout government in the last week or so. And I believe it was just announced that LGBT, I guess, rights, or however they want to refer to them as, are not protected by, I believe, Title VII of the Constitution, that outlines that you cannot discriminate against certain protected groups. And this is a really stark reversal from what was taking place during the Obama administration. And I want to say that this is what I predicted. The white people are getting on code, and they are no longer promoting LGBTism amongst themselves. They are going to continue to promote it amongst non-white communities, but amongst themselves, they are codifying, they are removing all of the different rules and regulations that they had to having them normalized in their part of society. They've recently announced that they are moving to ban them from military service. This is something that I've definitely said that they are doing in making their part of society in position to conduct greater warfare and terror amongst their non-white victims. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself on that point. Thank you very much.
Other folks that we have missed completely, if you have a hand up, the line should be open. Proceed.
Hello?
I think
Okay,
I heard.
go ahead.
All right.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for taking my call. Good evening. Thank you, young lady, for I'm waiting. One thing that I didn't hear on the clips because I was kind of in and out, but I don't think there was any audio on it, was the issue in Detroit with the ad that says, I think the ad says, "See Detroit as we do," and it had mostly white people. They said they screwed up. I think they let in a glimpse of what they really want. So I'm thankful for that, because I don't know how many times people need to see that they don't want us around. Hint, hint, here it is. Especially in a city that's all black. You asked about the sheriffs. According to Wikipedia, they tend to be kind of factual on this kind of thing. And as of 2015, which was just a couple of years ago, there are 3,081 sheriffs. So, yes, it doesn't make sense that Sheriff David Clark is the most famous one when there are 3,081 of them, at least. I think the gentleman, he asked about dealing with non-white people who are not of the same mind, the same way you deal with anyone who's not of the same mind. If you don't have to talk to them, you don't talk to them. Calling them names, I don't think solves any problems. I have called many a black person, many a name in racism. So That just didn't work. And even if people that you don't, well, this is another thing I want to say. We have to look for the logic in the statement. Just because we don't like the person doesn't mean they don't say the truth. So we always have to look for the truth in the situation, look for the logic and how to solve problems. So I know it can be difficult because this is emotional issues. It affects our families and we get upset. But we have to find a place to express that emotion so that we can deal with the issue in a logical and clear way. I'm not saying don't have emotions and don't have feelings because that doesn't help you either. We are not animals and dogs and cats. We are people. People have feelings, So just try to deal with them the best way you can. And I said the thing about the Detroit. Said that. Okay, I think that's it because I've been waiting for a while. So I think those are the things I want to say. If I think of something else and I have time, I'll say it. Thank you.
Ashe. The other female caller who spoke up simultaneously.
Greetings. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you, Gus, for taking my call. This is Amy out in Virginia in the DMV area. To the female caller that just spoke, I think what you said was very relevant, that just because we don't like someone doesn't mean that they're not saying something that's logical or truthful. I think for myself, I don't really like most people, and I think I can find fault with a lot of people or whatever it is that they're doing if I wanted to. But when I place myself in context or when I look at myself objectively, I realize, well, I really can't judge another person for whatever they're doing, and by person I mean non-white people, specifically black people. I'm not talking about white people. And with that being said, that doesn't mean that truth or logic, reason, solutions, creativity, different ways of viewing things can't come through those individuals who I myself might not necessarily agree with every single thing that they do or every single thing that they say. So I definitely agree with that. There's a couple of the clips that I wanted to comment on, primarily the first one being the one about the designer babies, or quote-unquote designer babies, or being able to edit genes in utero to produce children that don't have certain diseases or exude certain traits that you want them to have by manipulating their DNA. And I feel like that sometimes, I go through waves. I don't know what other non-white victims of racism, white supremacy go through, but I go through waves where it's like I totally get it. And or I go through moments. Let me put it like this: I go through moments where it's like I totally get it. I see this. I'm totally cool with it. My emotions are in check. I'm good to go. And then other moments, when I see it, what I'm seeing is absolutely horrifying. That it's hard for me to really accept it. And I force myself to, because I know that facing reality is the only way I can consider myself a mentally healthy individual. Excuse me, by being able to accept reality. But when we talk about the so-called designer babies, it's not so much that they are, like we're just talking about that thing in particular, but when I place it in context of white supremacy, or I blow it up and look at it, we're talking about a group of people who really do have a God complex. And really, at a psychological level, are warped in such a way that it's detrimental to the entire globe, all that we know, because we don't know, for real, Mars or Venus and whatever else is going on in all the other galaxies that we do scientifically have evidence exist, but we don't really have any interaction. So for our universe, and we're dealing with a group of people who have a God complex. With that being said, there's a couple of things that, what that calls into question. So if you're dealing in a system, not all of them feel that they have the God power. But if they're a part of the group that have the God power, then they subscribe to that. They adhere to that. And a lot of times, like these really subtle things that white people may not even like realize are happening, that I'm coming to realize, like what it means to be black means to be a nigger. What it means to be a nigger means to be not human. And what it means to be not human is like, that is why we have to fight for very, very basic human rights, or not like the why to the why, but a part of the reason why. So it's like I might interact with a white person, and I, knowing that I'm human, am interacting with this other person who I am looking at as human, because I haven't developed some kind of thing where I'm looking at them as non-humans. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, I don't know. But like that whole thing is there, like with their history and all that. And that ties into the other clip of the Confederate, that show. It doesn't surprise me that they have black people on who write, act, agree with, like contribute to, or whatever it is that they do for the production of this show. They have to. They have to. There's no way that a show called The Confederate, or whatever it's called, that talks about if the South had won or slavery had never been abolished, would not in this day, in 2017, not have non-white, specifically black individuals at least participate in the production of this show. So that didn't surprise me at all. And I'm sure that they feel that they are having some kind of creative ingenuity, or this is a lifetime opportunity, or whatever it is. But one of the things that I think is interesting to tie it back into the whole like designer baby thing is the only people that are going to be able to afford this kind of technology, this kind of science and healthcare and all that, are people with money. And in general, the people with money are non-white. The people with money are white. They are not non-white. So, you know, that like sometimes, you know, when it comes to non-white people, and I view how we view children and stuff like that, I know that there's a lot of love, there's a lot of affection, a lot of fear and all that kind of stuff, but that tells you how far people with money, i.e. white people, are willing to go to secure the future. If they're willing now to invest that much money to produce a child that does not have certain diseases and is smarter, quote, stronger, quote, or faster, quote, than other human beings, how invested they are in securing their leverage in the future. So this is not something that's going to end. There's no such thing as a nice white person that wants this to end. Like whatever, these people have made like advancements in which are not just psychological or theoretical, but actual scientific, that if they wanted to, they could do this. Now, morally, there might be some issue, but in fact, this is okay. Now, all of those three traits, smarter, stronger, faster, we already are. So it's not us who's necessarily looking for that per se. I just thought that was interesting. There was in one of the clips that there's two societies, one black, one white, both are unequal. That's always been. Sometimes like I'm almost, I feel slightly disrespected. I don't know if that's like an egoic thing that I'm doing, but I'm like, how could you say that? Like once you know a little bit, enough about history, you'll know that there's always been two. The minute white people I do apologize about that. The minute white people stepped off of the peninsula that they like to call a continent, that's what they created, that's what they set in stone, and that's what it's been. Someone else in another one of the clips, like another person said that that non-white people, black people, need a different moment of change other than the civil rights. I think I have to agree, like hands up, hands down, all the way through and through, 100% have to agree with that. I think that the civil rights moment, or what people call the civil rights moment or the civil rights movement, was like very much orchestrated by white people. And I think because they knew what we didn't know, as like they know what's going on. So in a certain amount of time after our so-called emancipation, there would rise a group of people who have had enough life experiences, enough wisdom, enough introduction into materials, whether it's, you know, scientific or literary or whatever, enough people, enough scientists, enough mathematicians, enough people have been thinking about this thing enough that they're going to come about a lot of energy. That energy has to go somewhere, and white people were very smart to create what I think they created the civil rights movement, and I'm to dissipate that energy. So I agree. We definitely do need a different movement of change, and I think it's going to happen whether we want it or not. I think white people have already polarized themselves to make that a reality, and I think when it finally comes to light, like really what is going on, will definitely be there, and we'll just figure out then, at that moment what we're going to do and how it's going to look. And then the last thing that I'll say is that, again, like I said, I'm someone who comes to something that's like I feel like I have total clarity, and in the moment I'm just like, what I see, it frightens me. Yes. That white people don't have anything outside of racism, white supremacy. That, like, when I listen to all the clips, that's what, like, there's no such thing as, like, a white people or a white person outside of the system that they created. And so if they don't have that, that means that they have to invest all that they have in order to maintain it and keep it, in which case that puts us in a very interesting position. So thank you all for listening.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. This is a caller from Florida. I hadn't been able to call because I'm in the process of doing some moving / relocating. So until then, my commentary may be spotty. I wanted to, I haven't been able to call in for workplace racism, so is it okay if I can share something that just happened a few days ago?
Proceed.
Gus? Okay. Basically, just a few days ago, this non-white, non-black male Puerto Rican guy who I've had a number of issues with since I've been at my store location, basically tried to accuse me of some money missing from my paperwork or something. Something wasn't showing up in my paperwork or something wasn't adding up. Make a long story short, when we had Brinks come in, and once they checked the safe and everything, the money was there, but it was just the fact that he lacked the imagination to think of something logical. Instead, he thought of the worst case scenario and in a roundabout way tried to accuse me of taking money. And so I confronted him on a number of things, and mainly I confronted him on the fact that contrary to what he may think of as following policy and procedure, that they don't indeed follow policy and procedure when it comes to cash handling. And I went down basically a list of things that they don't do that I know that they're supposed to do as managers based on my time out in New Orleans. So when he finally came to me yesterday and was saying, oh, they found the money, it was, with another band or drop or something, whatever it was. Either way, I knew the money was there because, hell, it was there. So, but my point is the fact that he has a very bad superiority complex. He doesn't speak any Spanish. He's very white identified, and so he goes out of his way to make himself look bigger than what he is, and has all the talking points of a Spanish dude who's converted over to American society. So I just say, like I said, it's just my continued stance, just being here in Central Florida when it comes to these individuals, that I treat them just like they are suspected white people practicing racism, because at the end of the day, we don't really have too much of allies and people that are fighting in our corner per se. But other than that, that's really all I had to say right now, because like I said, I just been dealing with a lot of stuff. So but if anything comes up, I'll get back to you guys. But it'll probably be a minute, or I'll try depending on what's going on. But other than that, that's pretty much it. I'm mute my line.
I said consistently, any of those accusations, certainly with money, that's going to be serious. But any accusations, take those very seriously. Policy and procedure. Our workplace racism is on Thursdays, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. But we state consistently policy and procedure. Make sure you read your policy and procedure. That is championship counter racism after a faulty accusation that, oh, Princess ran off with the money. And then they find it, and then it's, in addition to these, trumped up allegations, which are not false, let's, review policy and procedure to see why this happens so that we don't waste time and energy again, because I'm sure that's a lot of resource. You got to go and get other people and count and do all this. Let's, make sure this doesn't happen. Let's make sure that we're observing, following all procedures about how money is to be handled. Brilliant. Pull back to policy and procedure. The other folks that we've not heard from at all, if you have a hand up, if we've not heard from you, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Greetings to Gus, the host, the listeners and callers. The first audio segment I wanted to speak on was, I think that was the poor black teenagers, I think, or the students that were moving, I think, out to the Seattle area, and they were saying that they were coming from Texas, I believe. Like, just thinking about that, that does seem like that's a very long way to travel, and it seems like the value that they're placing on them is just to, as you said before, just to utilize their physique and their strength and bodies, but never really their minds. Because the lady that was speaking, she was saying that the only approach that they had was just a study hall. Like, you're going to need more than a study hall, because from when I was back in school, I'm thinking of study halls just being something toward the end of the school day, and it's really no what they call professional teachers or faculty really nurturing their minds, giving them some type of constructive information. They just only want to utilize their ability to play sports and be athletes. And what was really profound was when she said, like, how, I guess when the season would be over, it's like they just abandoned them. Or she didn't really use the term abandon, I don't think, but they just, kind of neglected them and didn't really do anything else for them, except for when it came back to time to do practice and have them concerned about playing sports. So I think primarily football. So it just goes to show you the lack of regard for Black life. The next audio segment was that one from down here in Ocala. I'm near Ocala, and like when I seen that clip, that was very interesting, because they were saying that they had like a screen on that, I guess, sign, and I don't know if someone came and took that off, but when white supremacists wants to practice racism, they'll utilize any kind of resource to pretty much project and put that message out. Even when, these racial slurs or words, they'll rearrange, they'll take letters from other words just to put something that wasn't even supposed to be there. And, they're saying, hey, we can't really prove this. And it reminded me of how Millie Fuller talks about being able to prove racism. And that was a white woman on there speaking on that clip. So I don't know, like, the language she was using, something about a hate crime, and that term should be examined as well. Like, I don't know if people are going to continue to use that, or if they're going to modify that term in the future or reform it. But I can see a lot of these incidents happening more frequently in the future, And my last point is like it was people mentioning about being Christian, like in that other clip where the guy, the black male, at that I guess it was a community meeting. That term was used a lot too, community. I guess that was a suspected race soldier said he was going to drag him outside. But that guy was very brave, and he stood to his code, I think, and he basically said that they were racist. But the people, the two white people, if you seen that video, they were very calm. They were crooning and all like that. It was, they were still in alignment with the white collective in that meeting, and they said they got, I think, almost 2,000 signatures. How they didn't want this, they call failing school, not to, I guess, receive funds. So it was like, hey, y'all pretty much impeding on black students getting an education. So, they pretty much got angry at him. He was saying, I guess this may have been a metaphor. They may seem like they are back in the 1800s. So, that was a brave black male, and I just want to compliment him staying focused and following the logic on producing justice. At least that's what I think he was doing. And that's pretty much all I have right now.
Appreciate that. Caller down in Florida. That is a tough one, to be in a room where you are being opposed by a large group of powerful whites and have someone yell out that you need to be dragged outside. That was the beginning of lynching and castrations for years and years and years of white supremacy, especially in places like Florida. Other folks that we've not heard from at all. Line should be open.
Have you heard?
Thomas in New York, proceed.
Good evening, Gus. Good evening to all the callers. That it's time to run when you hear that. HBO show Confederate. Man, I wanted to see this show. I said, this is going to be great. And then I see that they got black people that's doing the show. So now I'm like, I wanted it to be white people who did this show. I wanted to really get into their pathology and psychology as they try to codify how they present it. But now that they have black people doing it, it's going to be, kind of tainted in my opinion. So the clip you played about the Nashville police training the children, when I saw that episode, I only watched one of the episodes with the Charles Barkley talking about race in America thing. He went to the police stimulation training. I think it's just like how you could get a test and you could give a test to black people and you could give the same test to white people and we give totally different answers, but not in that way. This is designed for you to always, someone's coming at you with a knife, you're going to shoot. It's designed to automatically fit their scenario, how they want it to play out. So anyone who takes that test is going to see it from their point of view. About Sheriff Clark and other people, first I want to say sheriffs are real law enforcement. Police are not. Police are hired by the corporate municipalities to protect their assets, and sheriffs are usually elected to protect the people. As for Sheriff Sheriff Clark, to me his sound bites are priceless. Anytime he comes on TV, I make everyone shut up, turn that up. I gotta hear what he got to say. He's very confused, and it's just to me like something that you could offer someone else who's confused, is just to show them, and he gets everyone pissed off. It's so funny. He gets confused people bad with what he says. Gus always says, what are we going to do with these people? And were we going to hurt them? We're going to kill them? We're going to lynch them, castrate them? What are we going to do with all these black people? Because I'm not going to let anyone hurt my grandmother, and she is confused, and she's going to die confused, and I've accepted that. I've accepted the fact that there's a lot of black people who don't get it. They're not going to get it. And And I don't have conversations with them about racism anymore. Once I realize they don't get it and see their level of confusion, I leave them alone. If I have any conversation with them, if I hear them talking about it, I'll walk away. I don't even want to talk. I don't even want to be near them when they're talking about that. So I would say we just have to, ignore it. We got to accept it. We know why. I just don't understand why we always focus on, when we talk about politics, we focus on the black Republicans, be it, I heard about Condoleezza Rice, who was a genius. I mean, if you look at her, what she's done, after age, she did it. Colin Powell, we talk about Clark and Ben Carson. But I look at anyone who's in that political field as having, they're definitely a part of the system. So, I mean, I look at them all the same if they're in politics. That's just me. I just wanted to say to the caller who generally calls in and calls on the ICE albinos, I told him about Parkinson's being a disease that seems to affect mostly whites, and how which is one of the reasons why they use so many drugs, but that's another story. But Lyme disease. And I personally witnessed here at the hospital, man, they will cut the clothes off, mostly these people. And you will see fleas, ticks, those 1,000 legs. I mean, it's mortifying. And for some reason, ticks, and especially lice, I saw a lice case that was out of this. I had to pull up a YouTube video to show my kids exactly what it looked like, what I saw. Never saw anything like this in my life. It's, so just things that they get, we don't, we need to probably invest in a lice colony or something. I don't know. I had something else I wanted to add. I could add later if there's time. It's very important, I thought. But the last point I wanted to make right now was my wife the other day. She was actually, I won't even talk about that. I wanted to say, you played a clip about the basketball players being illegally, being exploited, as athletes usually are. And there was the owner of the Detroit Pistons. His name is Tom C.O.W.S. And he's you would think he's a good white person. He's pledged $10 million to donate to Flint, Michigan waters crisis and all this stuff. Even though he has $3.5 billion, he could have just gave him the $10 million. But either way, he just bought a company. His corporation that he owns to get all his money just bought a company, C.O.W.S Technologies Inc. And this company provides telephone services to Michigan prisons inmates, and he's charging them $22.56 a 15-minute call. And this is the owner of the Detroit Pistons. And I mean, personally, I think this is a huge conflict of interest. But they serve over 2 million prisoners throughout the United States. So this is mostly black people, of course. And some states, they have to pay $14 a minute. And they recently just started regulating it. So I think this guy's way worse than Donald Sterling as far as what he's doing. This is putting poor people in more debt. I have to spend $22 to speak to my mother for 15 minutes, and it's probably a crime I didn't commit, but I took a plea because I was afraid of the all-white jury. It's just ridiculous. And if there's time, I'd like to go into something else. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Thomas in New York. There are folks that we've missed completely. Any folks that have a hand up that we have not heard from at all?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Greetings to you, the host, the callers, and the listeners. I wanted to mention about the white people or the ICE albinos. Just, when they're gone, because they will eventually be gone, there won't be any more white people on Earth. When that happens, is anybody truly going to miss them? Is anybody truly going? You might be sad for a little bit, but I think you will be more happy than you will be sad. And I just say, yeah, it is going to happen, and there's nothing that we can do to stop it. But I would say that I want to see it in my lifetime. I don't want to be here, and die with white people still here. I want to see it in my lifetime that there's no more white people. And I think that no black person should work against white people no longer being on earth or in existence. No black person should ever work against that. I think that's counterproductive. And I would also say that I have not heard, in all my lifetime, I've not heard one solution that is outside of white people no longer existing. I haven't heard one solution to white supremacy. And I would just wonder, has anybody in the world heard of one solution to white supremacy? And the only solution I've ever heard of that makes any sense is that they won't exist anymore. And then there won't be any more white supremacy. And then the other thing is to Mr. Thomas in New York. He was, you were telling me a lot about the one thing I really agree with is that if we start identifying the quote unquote gods that we worshipped or the way that we went about our natural way of experiencing the supreme being or whatever we want to call it. If we go back to the way we were doing things and drop our religions, then we would do this a lot quicker. I agree with you. But I would just say again, I haven't heard one solution outside of white people not existing. Thank you.
All right. Did we miss anyone? Anybody have a hand up that we've not heard from at all?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Gus. Good evening, callers, listeners. This is the voice out of Florida. I just wanted to say that there were some clips that I've ran across. The one, I don't know if anybody's seen, because I was hoping that Stacey was on tonight, and I was going to ask her for more information. But there's two incidents over there in the UK that has brought some concern to me. One of them, there was a Facebook video that went viral. There's a Facebook video that went viral about the UK police. They drew semi-automatic weapons on 3 individuals, black individuals, that was coming to a residence. It was like a high-rise apartment building to pick up, I guess, his son from his child's mother. And they just pulled the guns out on him, had basically with their hands in the air for like the duration of the video was like 10 minutes. And I'm like, guys' arms are getting tired and it's like, don't move. And the lady's yelling, don't move, they'll shoot you. And it was just like so terroristic. But I don't know the general gist of how that played out. So that's why I was going to ask Stacey if she knew about it or if anybody else knew about it. And there was another one with that I've seen, not too familiar with it. I just briefly read the article about there was some rape victims in the UK, and I think somebody sent me an article saying that they about it was some Asian men that end up being the assailant on this rape case. So I wanted to know further details on that as well. Down here, I went to a board meeting. I don't know if anybody's from New Jersey, but we have Steve Gallons, who did an incredible job with the children up there in Jersey. And because he did such a good job, like anything, they'll dig in and see something that they can find on you that they can discredit you for. Because from my understanding, when Steve Gallons was up there, he employed other blacks that might have some ties to family members, but because he did a great job up there with the school system, they they said they were bringing charges on him, but it wasn't really any charges. It was kind of like a bargaining tool to say that, either you leave the state or we're going to bring these charges on you. So it was a mutual agreement. He came down here and he ran for a position on the board system down here, and he got elected. And now he's on the Dade County board system. And I went and I watched this guy because I heard so much good reviews on him. And I watched Steve Gallen on the board just rip the superintendent apart. And the reason why he was ripping them apart is because another black lady that's in charge of downtown, like in the downtown Miami area, she's in charge of that whole area where a lot of the white, the other white commissioners, they have been known to been hiring other white contractors and not making it, a fair across the ground as far as, hiring black contractors as well. So she brought it up to the attention, and now they're going under investigation because these white commissioners are having ties with these contractors. So now they have it's like everything is going up. Everything is on notice. Everything is on alert. So now what they did was when I went down to the meeting, I found it very interesting. They were trying to move her out of that position because she was, putting so much attention on the people that didn't want her to put attention on them. And they created another job to try to shift her from out of her original job into another job so she wouldn't be in the position where she is able to investigate and bring these wrongdoings to the light. And I just found that very interesting. And then Steve Gallen, was out there fighting for her, and he started ripping this superintendent up, making him look like he was a little boy on that panel. And I'm in my head and I'm thinking okay, this guy is really ripping this dude. I know something is going to backfire later on about it. 2 days later, the article comes out and they take away Steve Gallen's license down here in Florida. And I said, it's always something. Like every time you fight for justice, they go right behind and just, do something else. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I'll mute my line. Appreciate it.
Appreciate that. Anybody that we missed completely? Watch that word fair. That's what I forgot. Anyone that we missed?
Bird.
Yes, sir.
Greetings, everyone. It is a heck of a coincidence. I am very much aware of what the last caller is talking about. And I do know Steve Gallen, former student at Miami Northwestern Senior High and former principal also at Miami Senior High. He was quite accurate at giving a report on the incidents that have been taking place down here, and specifically with Miami-Dade County schools, with the superintendent. I keep making non-white people, especially non-white black people, aware, because sometimes I think we get confused when a white person is speaking Spanish, that somehow they're not white people, but they are white people. White people speak every language that I know of, including African languages, more so than a lot of non-white black people do. And racism is alive and well in South Florida in sophisticated fashions, as the last caller was speaking about. Because I've mentioned similar situations, because I'm very close to one of the non-white black people that has assisted Steve in getting elected. and he has been at the forefront of attempting to fight against the system of white supremacy down here. Anyway, I heard the your report on the exploitation of black athletes, and you are accurate in that process. There's always going to be white people deeply involved. I would say the non-white people, non-white black people, basically are more or less on the lower end of the negative aspects when it's dealing with athletics, because the white people have all the resources. They have all the resources, and they actually pay some people to do certain things. And those black people in situations, I know one in particular that has high levels of having to pay child support, and so all of his paychecks leave from him. And so what he does, he transports non-white black males all over the country in a van. I know if I was a parent and someone came to me that I didn't know and said they would take my child to Alabama, University of Alabama, Ohio State, all of these in one trip, I would not let my child go with that person anywhere. Ohio State is much aware of who are the top football players are. They don't need to be going all these different places. For the most part, it's just a means for white people to make money with these scouting combines and all of these other camps and stuff that they be throwing. And they have the black males to bring these athletes to these places. And they pay them, $500 here, $1,000 there, stuff like that. That's how that's done. So you were accurate on that. To the situation of the putting other victims in the realm of Uncle Tom and Coon and blah blah blah. It keeps coming from my mind. The date, December 7th, 1990. I brought that question up in a meeting at someone's house. I was aware of everybody at the house except for there was this elder-looking gentleman that looked like a college professor with glasses on. He was quite quiet during most of the meeting, and but when I brought that question up, that's similar to what was brought to us tonight, he stated, well, if anybody's an Uncle Tom or a Coon or whatever, that would be everybody that is non-white, which is certainly so. First of all, I've never heard a meaning that made any sense to what those terms mean, and it doesn't accurately, it doesn't really exclude any one of us. I mean, even the clothes that we have on, ultimately, it comes from a white person in some way, shape, or form. The clothing that we have, so we all participate. We do. For the most part, whether we like it or not, stop at stop signs and stop lights, although we may feel like running through them, primarily because there are consequences that ultimately would be put upon us by a white person in some way, shape, or form. So all of us conform to the global system of racist white supremacy. There's enough of work that we could be doing that we do not be involved that close in judgment with other non-white people. especially non-white black people, but somehow in our confusion, I think because it's easy to do, and I guess in some kind of way, when I was doing the incorrect things, it kind of like made you feel like you was actually doing something. You may have, but it wasn't constructive. That's for sure. So those are just some of my thoughts on that subject matter. Stay away from it. Stay away from it. Focus on white people. If you're going to focus on anybody, you focus on white people because they ultimately are the base of the global system of racist white supremacy. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
We only have about 2 minutes. Did we miss anybody completely? Is anybody who has a hand up that we did not get to hear from at all? Were we able to get everybody? Make sure we didn't miss anybody in the last few minutes. Vanessa Grubbs, she will be here on Monday. Make sure I remind folks, Dr. Vanessa Grubbs, black female. She is a nephrologist, kidney specialist. Her husband, black male, had kidney failure, needed a kidney transplant. Seeing what happened to him gave her a much better understanding of the system of racism, white supremacy, and how it decimates black patients in need of an organ transplant, like her now husband. Anyway, she wrote her book. Just came out last month, Hundreds of Interlaced Fingers. She'd written about this topic before in terms of black people making up a disproportionate number of the organs that are harvested, given to whites, and how whites are more likely to get an organ transplant, and they have shorter wait times, which literally is the difference between life and death. If you have kidney failure and you're waiting for an organ and you might have to wait a year longer, 6 months longer, that literally could mean I'm dying or I get to live longer and do other constructive things, put racism out of business. Anyway, she'll be here on Monday. This is the same doctor. She came to Seattle about 3 weeks ago. She was talking about her book and confessed that she had planned not to talk about racism and called Gus militant. Looking forward chatting it up with her this coming Monday. I'll see if I have time to read our comment, or this might be along. One listener, he wrote and said, I noticed that it's very prominent most black people's willingness to name call and label other non-whites who don't agree with their interpretations and often express these individuals should be held up to a term frequently used, accountable for their actions. However, what is most interesting, most times you never hear these individuals express this type of sentiment and disdain towards the people who are responsible for the conditions and creating these thoughts in the minds of non-white people. I could be incorrect, but based on my understanding of the society reality of the world we live in, and the construct of behavior is a learned phenomenon. Absolutely. And I would only say criticism should begin at home. I hear lots of vigorous critiques of other non-white people victims of white supremacy. The person that you are most familiar with in terms of errors, missteps, ways that we are supporting racism, white supremacy is yourself. So I always advocate whenever it's time to scrutinize and, get down. Hey, we are messing up. We need to be held accountable. Let's get out the mirror when we get ready to hold other victims of white supremacy accountable. That's it. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. Always encourage that. I do not think cigarettes, alcohol, cannabis, any other narcotics have helped us eliminate white supremacy racism. I think there's a lot of evidence that racists, that they have been able to further maintain and strengthen their strangle on black people worldwide, just with the use of their narcotics. I think that's one way we could wage counter-racist economics as well. That way we don't have to spend a whole lot of money to further finance their terrorism by saying we're not going to buy any of that stuff to begin with. Stay sober and use our brain computer to the maximum ability. That's it. Thanks everyone for participating in the broadcast. I hope it was a constructive investment of your time and energy. We'll be here on Monday evening. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of Black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another Black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.